just my first.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Hello. Can you hear us okay? Good. Welcome to the special meeting of the Transportation Commission. Topic being East 19th Street, Harper to O'Connell. Topic that's been around for a long time, and we'll get the opportunity tonight to dig into it and provide feedback to the city. I'm Steve Evans. I'm the vice chair of this group. Commissioner Payden may be able to arrive late. In the meantime, I'll be conducting the meeting, which we'll get started here in a second with the staff part. The intent is for staff presentations. Dave Cronin will lead that, and we'll follow that by public comment, and the commission will have a discussion, and then we'll adjourn. And we're really looking forward to hearing from everybody and hearing what staff and some of the organizations around the community have to say about this topic. So with that, Dave, it's all yours.
Thanks, Steve. Dave Cronin, City Engineer in the Public Works Department. I guess I'd want to start by saying I appreciate some of the staff members as well as the public that came to discuss this project tonight. As you know, we have an interdepartmental multimodal staff team that we formed last year, and that contains members from different departments within the city, and we meet every other week to discuss projects, programs that come up, and also we do some education as well to cross-train employees across departments. So we've kind of taken this project on with that multimodal staff team to put together this presentation, so some of the other members are going to help present some items and also be available for questions that may come up, because we know that this project affects all departments. So I think I first want to just go around and recognize all the staff members that are here. So if you have questions during the presentation for the different departments relating to the project, you could feel free to interrupt and ask those. So we got Jessica Mortinger in our planning office, our regional transportation planner. Derek Rogers, our Parks and Rec director. Jim King, fire marshal from the fire department. Bob Nugent, our transit director. Jeff Crick in our planning office, and obviously Amanda Saheen, our transportation engineer. Then Adam Heffley from our police department is here as well, and Stephen Mason, our recreational programmer from Parks and Rec, is here too. So just want to start by recognizing them, and some of them are going to help kind of go through some of the presentation. And let me get back to all right. So as you remember, I think it was in November we had a study session to introduce this topic in this project, and we provided you some information. So we're going to go over some of the same information, but we also presented some more information in regards to this project. So if you guys have questions as we go through, feel free to interrupt me and ask me. Just a little bit about the background of the project. 19th Street between Harper and O'Connell is constructed back in 1959. It was not constructed to city street standards, an old chip seal road. It's in need of reconstruction and improving to city standards. It has a very poor pavement condition index. We've had numerous water line breaks over the years. We had 4 last year, so there's some infrastructure that is failing out there that we feel needs to be addressed. Some of the segments have sidewalk along the north side. There's none on the south side, so I think that's something that we're looking to improve as well with this project. And I'll also mention that it's on our bikeway plan to have future bike lanes added. A little bit about the history of the planning and the CIP. We originally began thinking about proceeding with reconstructing the street back in 2014, which we'll discuss the Venture Park project here in a minute. But back then we planned on doing design in 2015 and then construction in 2016. Since then, we have kind of delayed the project and pushed it down the road because it hasn't been as needed as I think we felt originally, but we're seeing some movement being out at Venture Park, and we've planned this now for construction in the CIP for 2019. And this was something we discussed last year when we were putting together the budget and the 5-year CIP plan, and ultimately decided to include it in 2019. Has a construction cost of about $3.6 million. And one thing that I would like to point out early on is we don't have any additional plans to widen 19th Street to the west or do any other projects in the future to increase capacity. And the plans are to maintain one lane in each direction for 19th Street. Jeff's going to talk about Venture Park here in a minute and some of the history of the development, but back when we were planning Venture Park, we decided that we needed to put in some infrastructure so that was pad ready for businesses to come in and develop. So we spent $7.5 million out there in 2013 and 2014 doing site grading, putting in streets, water lines, sewer lines. So that included O'Connell north of 23rd Street, Venture Park Road, or Venture Park Drive, which runs east-west and connects over to East Hills Business Park. And we also realigned the frontage road over here just west of O'Connell. And additionally, we extended O'Connell up to 19th Street. And the thinking at that time was that we would plan, and this was in 2014 when we finished the project, that we planned to redo 19th Street in 2016. And at that time, it would be the best to make the official connection because the condition of the street was in such poor shape that we felt it would be better to wait until that was improved, until the connection was made. So that's a little bit about the history of the infrastructure that was installed at Venture Park. So one of the things about planning for Venture Park and the planning process was that we looked at providing different access points, and that the 9th Street connection would provide safe, efficient access for city residents that are working out there at Venture Park and then at East Hills Business Park as well. Fast forward to 2018, we finally see some movement going on out there. There's some work going on at VanTrust is constructing a spec building with estimated completion date later this year. So we hope that that momentum builds and we can bring jobs into the community, which was the original vision of Venture Park. Also, another point about the importance of this connection is I think it's going to be important to help the marketability of that business park to further enhance job creation for Lawrence residents as it continues to develop in the future. So when we went through the planning process for the business park, we did a traffic impact study. It looked at different scenarios at, I guess, 50% build out and a full build out. I'd say it was a pretty conservative estimate. Industrial parks can vary in trip generation, whether it's more warehouse and automated type industrial or more manufacturing that may have more employees and more trips. So there could be some variation, but this trip generation that we used, I think, was fairly conservative. And it did estimate that there would be approximately 13,000 trips at the full build out. We looked at intersections in proximity to the business park, primarily 19th and Harper, 23rd and O'Connell, and K10 and East Hills. The assumptions that were made that 30% of the traffic would use 19th Street and about 70% would use 23rd Street. There's some information on the peak hour trips for 19th Street in the AM and the PM peak hour, which is used to help decide if intersection improvements are needed. And then I did put this note on there that based off the assumption of the full build out and the trip generation of the 12,945 trips, if you did, based off the assumption that 30% of the traffic would use 19th Street, that would generate 3,884 vehicles per day.
Dave, could I interrupt you on this one slide?
Sure.
Is there any data comparing this projection to recent traffic counts in these areas? The way I'm reading this slide is that these are the projections. Do you have any comparative analysis between these numbers and existing traffic counts?
I don't. These projections are for that site. So,
Okay.
And so, to this point, nothing has really changed. It's all still vacant. As the park begins to develop, we could see trends to see, well, is it on track with the projections of the original study? That will just depend on what the actual industrial uses are out there.
Right.
So until more of that's known, there's no way to compare the study versus back when it was done in 2012 versus if we were to do a study today. If we were to do a study today, it would be pretty similar to this.
So is it safe to say that most of these are additional trips based on Venture Park being fully built out?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. These are the trips that would access the site.
Okay.
Yeah, that would
Got it.
generate the site. And some recommendations from that traffic study and looking at some of the adjacent intersections was that over at 19th and Harper, currently it's a four-way stop. Even in the full build-out condition, 100% development at Venture Park, it's still operated at a level of service B, which from a traffic engineering perspective is still acceptable for a four-way stop for capacity reasons. And that the study didn't recommend any geometric improvements would be necessary at that intersection. At 23rd and Harper as well, full build out operated at a level of service C. There's a signalized intersection there now, and it didn't make any recommendations for improvements. And then at 23rd and O'Connell, with the traffic projections, it projected warrants for a traffic signal at that intersection. So when the infrastructure was installed, a traffic signal was installed at that intersection, that is really the primary access point to the business park. And so that was done ahead of time, back when the infrastructure was put in, with that understanding that that would be the primary access point, and turn lanes were put in as well to accommodate that intersection for future traffic. And now I'm going to turn over to Jeff to go over a little bit of the planning history.
Good evening. Jeff Crick with the City County Planning Office. Just going to kind of go through some of the history that our office has had with this property over its long time here. To give you an idea, we actually kind of came to the property all the way back in 2008 before it was even in the city of Lawrence and in the possession of the city of Lawrence itself. The original Farmland Industries redevelopment plan that was adopted as part of Horizon 2020 was completed in 2008 originally. It was brought into the city of Lawrence via an annexation agreement on both the county and the city agreed to that agreement in 2009. The city of Lawrence became the owner of the property in 2010, as you can see there. I think one of the big things to kind of give you an idea with that one is that in 2008, one of the key infrastructure goals that was lined out and provided based on the comments that we received was to provide a road network through the site that provides a connection to the city's existing road system and connects to East Hills Business Park. So the platting and all the work that the city undertook after that was based on the Farmland Industries redevelopment plan and those initial goals that were lined out and approved by the city commission and the county commission. So in 2012, when the preliminary plats and the final plats were adopted by the city commission, they followed those goals and kind of those key hallmarks that returned to the plan. And also just to let you know, in 2016, usually, I should preface this, usually we do a 5-year update to all of our plans in the city, but because nothing had occurred at Farmland since it was first adopted in 2008, we never did a 5-year update. We figured we'd start updating it as development started to occur around it. That started to happen in 2016, so the plan was updated, adjusting the maps to kind of show what had actually been platted versus a theoretical idea that was actually in the table out there. And to kind of show you an example of that here, kind of two different maps here. Both of them are the same map, just at different points in time. The one on the left-hand screen is a 2008 map that kind of showed the road connections and the pattern that was envisioned by everybody involved at that time. I will let you know I was not here at that time. I was not with the city of Lawrence. But that connection that you can see highlighted in the red rectangle is the same connection you can see in 2018 that is highlighted, that follows the plat that was adopted by the City Commission, showing a connection between O'Connell as it meets up to 19th Street. So just a very brief history on that one. Plats are required to go before the City Commission in this instance, so the City Commission saw the final plat and accepted the easements and dedications to it, and also the amendment to the comprehensive plan was required to go before the City Commission, and it was also adopted at that time. And I'll hand this over to Jessica, but I'd be glad to answer any questions you have in a little while.
One of the responsibilities we have with the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization is establishing and adopting regional long-range transportation plans for the region. And so to look back at the history of where 19th Street connecting in terms of to O'Connell or Franklin, it's been in plans for over 20 years to connect as part of our roadway network. I don't actually have evidence of plans past 2020, but it could exist from before that since it was annexed into the city. But you'll see over those years it's been identified in those plans showing a connection to either O'Connell or even further to the east to Franklin Road. During the scope of our last transportation plan update called T2040, we developed a travel demand model for that plan update, and that included a scenario both with and without a connection at 19th Street at O'Connell, based on the comments we heard in the planning process with concerns about traffic from neighborhood and area residents. So just to give you a little background, we basically establish a travel demand model which makes projections about what existing employment and housing, population look like in the base year in a validated model that loads trips on the network in a form of trip assignment. We then do that same thing for our out year, which is 20 plus years into the future, so for 2040, where we project based the future population growth with future employment projections. And we say if we do no transportation projects, so if we spend no transportation dollars and make no transportation investments, what will the level of service look like on our roadways? And that's a volume over capacity ratio. So what is the volume of the road that it's able to handle based on the existing capacity that roadway has? We found from our base year model to our 2040 no-build model, in all of our 2040 scenarios, that vehicle miles traveled across the entire county. The model is countywide, although you're seeing pictures Lawrence specific, so you can see some detail. That vehicle miles traveled are going to increase is projected at 143%, which means that trip making is going to happen. That trip making and traffic counts across our network is projected to happen in the region, and you can see how that's reflected in the capacity challenges that the model anticipates we could have by 2040 if we don't address those issues. Specifically for the scenario A, which had a connection to 19th Street, and scenario C, which did not have a connection to 19th Street, we looked at the values of trips over that corridor. If you query points from all along the 19th Street corridor, basically from Iowa Street to O'Connell at a connection, the difference between connecting and not connecting the road averages a 1.8% increase in trips along 19th Street from Iowa to O'Connell. However, there's no increase. That trip count, that trip volume falls off in the sense that there's no correlative increase or change in increase in trips after you get between Haskell and Massachusetts. So once you get past Haskell, there's actually a trip decrease in the segment trips between the connection and no connecting model. So the model is not showing that trips along the entire corridor are impacted by connecting 19th Street to O'Connell. However, it does project that there's an 18.1% increase that you see, which is not to exceed an additional 1,000 trips a day for the section between O'Connell and Harper. So that's kind of what the model shows us in the scenarios when we look at long-term planning and regional connectivity in terms of transportation networks. Out of the T2040 plan, the steering committee recommended, and what's in the approved plan, in terms of the responsiveness to the plan, another thing that Transportation 2040 does is lay out the street network based on functional classification for the entire community. During this plan process, the steering committee recommended, and it was approved, a downgrading classification on the major thoroughfares map from minor arterial to collector for 19th Street from Haskell to O'Connell. That matches the collector level connection that's currently planned on O'Connell from 19th to 31st. The plan did still determine that connecting 19th Street and O'Connell was appropriate to balance the network for our transportation system. So that's what's in the approved plan related to 19th Street, and the outputs kind of the plan that might help answer some of the questions that you've had based on the data we have. And I'm going to turn it over to Jim to answer some questions and present to you about emergency access.
Good evening, I'm James King. I'm Division Chief with the Fire Medical Department and Fire Marshal to the city. I'd just like to address the emergency aspect this evening of the importance of East 19th Street. The Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical Department is an accredited agency. And as an accredited agency, we rely heavily on two documents. One is the standard of cover, and the other is the International Code Council Model Code, specifically the International Fire Code. The standard of cover is produced by our agency over a 5-year period, each time that our accreditation renews. And it gives us a chance to look at our capabilities within the city from top to bottom, every aspect of our agency. And in that, we produce a standard of cover. In other words, how we respond to any and all emergencies within the city. An outcome of the standard of cover then is we look at our response times across the city, and we have identified as part of our standard of cover that we want to arrive at any emergency in the city within 6 minutes, 90% of the time. The International Code Council, the International Fire Code specifically, governs how we regulate businesses in the community and providing a safe built environment. And so as a part of that, we look at access to not only geographic areas such as Venture Park or East Hills Business Park, but also access into all structures. And in that, we look at providing or having provided for us two means of access as remotely as possible so that we can, should something occur in another location, that we're able to access a building or a development area. The reason for this is time is very critical to us, and it's very critical in an emergency. So using a medical emergency for an example, where a patient has no heartbeat and no respirations. For each minute that that person is in that critical state, they lose, survivability decreases by 10% or greater each passing minute. What that means is when we're looking at a 6-minute response time 90% of the time, and we know that clinical death occurs at 10 minutes and biological death shortly after, it's very important for us to get there. So access becomes very important. In terms of a fire grows exponentially by the minute. And so a small fire contained to an object in a room can within minutes go from a very small incipient fire to a free burning fire that involves multiple rooms. So while that's very dramatic, it also demonstrates how quickly access is important to us. In responding in this area into Venture Hills and East Hills Business Park, our closest station is Fire Station number 2 at the edge of the Douglas County Fairgrounds. They now have to proceed down Haskell South to 23rd Street, negotiate congestion and traffic and lights out to East Hills Business Park, which is the closest entrance, and then work their way back into either East Hills or Venture Park, or O'Connell also is there now. Or we have to go further east out to Noria Road, which we cannot meet our 6-minute response time in that routing. Let's see, sorry, lost my place. So anyway, it's access into that area is critical. We're advocating for the closer aspect of access through East 19th Street to reduce our response times and thereby also meet the demands of the fire code and the standard recovery. Happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
Question.
Sure.
There has been some suggestion of using transponders on your vehicles. Can you speak to that?
I'm gonna estimate that you're speaking to the Opticom devices that change signals, or
No, the gates.
Gates, and then you'd have a transponder to open the gate so that it would keep other traffic away from that entrance, and it would be used for emergency vehicles and buses.
okay. The system that you're speaking to is the Opticom system, and currently that works off of an infrared device that sends a signal to a receiver and will activate either a traffic signal or a device such as a gate. We are in the process of transitioning from that IR device into a GPS activated device, which tracks us remotely and allows us to do some fencing, which goes with directions and turns and things like that. But we're not in favor of gating that particular area. We're not in favor of gating any public street because of there's always the reliability of gates. And if a gate fails, it slows our response because then we have to either reroute or find a way to physically open that gate. We're much more in favor of traffic calming devices such as the speed cushions to limit traffic or slow traffic going through an area.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, since you're up here, and that way I won't have to call you back.
Sure, no.
I walked the site today with a few of the residents, and I noticed how close Fire Station 2 was to 23rd Street.
Yes.
It's actually much closer to 23rd than it is to 19th. And it's the first time I've heard the two pathways in, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess 19th would be one of those.
Yes.
But just without doing any measuring or anything, it seems like for many of the areas, probably East Hills and those areas to the south part of Venture Park and East Hills, you probably access those from 23rd Street, even if you could go on 19th. Is that a fair thing to
That
say?
would be a fair assessment. However, it's my opinion that having access through 19th Street would still be much quicker because we would have less congestion to have to negotiate, and we would not have the traffic signals to negotiate at 23rd and Osdale in order to get in there.
Okay.
Or O'Connell, rather. I'm sorry, I keep saying
Okay.
Osdale.
Okay. All right.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you.
Bob Nugent, Lawrence Transit. Transit for 19th Street to be open for us really, it kind of has the same thing as what Jim was talking about, and much more direct access to the East Hills Business Park. Right now, and in our past, we've had a lot of issues with operating on 23rd Street, high speeds on 23rd Street. At Noria, we used to go in the back way to East Hills. The high speeds kept us from going in the main entrance and forced us to go down to Noria, so that always gave us somewhat of an issue there. This is much more of a direct access. Once again, it stays away from the signals, stays away from a lot of the congestion, reduces our running time, gives us a better opportunity to have a better level of service out there and reduce our overall cost to a certain extent. There is an area in that just north of 19th Street and Harper, in that area where there's some low to moderate income. There's a trailer park over in there, which is a high ridership area usually for us if they have good access to our buses. If you go deep into that subdivision, it gets harder to get out, takes a lot longer to get out. Usually our rider shed kind of area is about a quarter mile. So, and you start getting into that subdivision, it gets a lot more than a quarter mile as you get in there. And then, well, as I said, the utilization of resources, this definitely allows us the ability to provide more service out there. gives us a much more direct route between, most of our routes come together, so you can access our whole system from anywhere in our community. All our transfers, for the most part, take place in downtown. If we had more direct access straight to East Hills, it would reduce the time for people to transfer from the downtown and get to East Hills, say for business or for work trips in the morning without having to go 23rd and all that. So anyway, that's all we have for transit. I think, David, you're up. Any questions?
Bob, what's your ridership going out there now?
Ridership in East Hills kind of goes up and down. A lot of that's is the result of General Dynamics. General Dynamics is a contract organization, so they do contracts, and they may have a 3-month contract, 6-month contract. So it's up and down all the time. And at times we don't have any ridership, and then all of a sudden they're asking for more service out there. So it kind of goes up and down all day. We do have pretty much ridership out there all day. So it starts at about 7 o'clock in the morning because their shifts are pretty much across the board or across the clock. So
Any idea where you pick those people up?
they come from all over.
Everywhere.
And because Route 5 is the one, is the one that serves east and west. So anything that's coming in at 31st and Iowa, people coming from even out as far as Wakarusa can access that route to get in there. 6th Street, Route 11 and Route 6 also feed a lot into the service that goes out to East Hills. But 5 is one of our major providers.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Trying to get away from the poker.
All right, thanks. I'm back. All right. One of the things we also did here recently last year is looked at traffic counts, and there's a lot of concern amongst the community about increasing trips on 19th Street, and we also wanted to see what the impact has been since the South Lawrence Traffic Way was completed on east-west traffic on 23rd Street and 19th Street. Because my impression of before South Lawrence Traffic Way was completed, there's a lot of traffic that's cutting through on some of these side streets to avoid the congestion on 23rd Street. So, one of the things that we saw with these traffic counts was a dramatic decrease in traffic on 23rd Street, particularly. That decreased 15 to 30% after the South Lawrence Traffic Way is completed, as those trips have been taken off the city street network and put on the state highway system for the trips that are traveling through town. We also saw a decrease that trickled down to 19th Street, where it decreased 5 to 20%, depending on where you're at on 19th Street. And so when we looked at these traffic counts, KDOT takes a count every 3 years in approximately the same place. And so over time, you can kind of get an average of traffic and traffic projections and increases. And when we took these counts here last year, we saw these changes, particularly for the east-west traffic. And by looking at the numbers, it's the decrease is less than the projected trip generation from making this connection to O'Connell. I would note that as we saw the decrease in numbers on the east-west streets, we didn't see a lot of change on the north-south traffic on Naismith or Mass Street. A little bit of an increase on Haskell at 23rd, and that may be due to the interchange that's at 31st and Haskell. This is the map that references those traffic counts and the numbers. And so I guess to conclude, it's staff's recommendation to proceed with the project. It's in the CIP to construct in 2019, so we feel if we're going to follow through with that, we need to get going with design plans here in 2018. I think that the three key points about moving forward with this project is that it's going to improve the infrastructure that's out there now with that street segment that's in failing condition. It supports sustainable transportation options as we're making a connection of the bike lanes that exist west of Harper on 19th Street and the bike lanes that we put in on O'Connell Street. We're going to also make the sidewalk connection. We've talked about additional ability for transit to access Venture Park with this connection as well. And you know, the main reason is providing transportation opportunities and connection points for Lawrence citizens to make safe, efficient access to different locations in town, but particularly for this project to the business park at Venture Park in East Hill, so that residents that live in the community can make safe and efficient a trip to get to work or to do business. And we've also talked about the emergency service and providing adequate service response times, and that's another key recommendation for proceeding with this project, because as we see that Venture Park's beginning now to have development, we need to have that ability to have response time. So I think what we're going to be looking for today is for you guys to provide us some feedback on our scope. We're going to propose a scope of design to the City Commission to get recommendation to proceed forward. And so, you know, I think it's our professional opinion that's important to go forward with this project for the reasons that we mentioned. To construct the street, we would recommend doing one lane each direction, providing a center turn lane where we're able to do that for access. This also helps us have the ability where we don't need a center turn lane to have a grass median, that we can have safer pedestrian crossings. And I think this design with this and including bike lanes and sidewalks would meet our complete streets policy. So a couple of other points that I included on here that we would ask the design consultant to look at would be to evaluate options for access management to minimize the need for that center turn lane, evaluate locations for crosswalks or mid-block crossings. It's about a half a mile from O'Connell to Harper, so it'd be, I think, a good idea to find a location halfway to provide a safe crossing. Also included a note about looking at the feasibility of installing a roundabout at Harper and 19th Street, if it was even feasible and if it was something that helped safety at that intersection. From a capacity standpoint, it's not needed, but I did note that we should at least look at that being an option for the intersection. One of the things we've looked at through here as well is that there's a gap sidewalk on the south side of 19th Street from Haskell to O'Connell, or from Haskell to Harper Street, and we try to look at putting that in this project too, fit into the budget. I think it'd be important also to look at evaluating options for traffic calming from Haskell to Harper. As Jessica mentioned, with the T2040 study, we don't anticipate that this project cause any additional traffic west of Haskell Street, but with the declassification of 19th Street from Haskell to O'Connell, and for the expectation that there certainly will be increase from Harper to O'Connell and probably some from Haskell to Harper Street, that we should look at evaluation of traffic calming. I would also note we got to, when we're looking at that, we need to be considerate that we also don't push traffic to other side streets. So when we're looking at going forward with the design of this project, we don't want to put so much traffic calming on a street that starts to deter traffic to other side streets, such as 21st Street or other streets that could cause additional cut-through traffic if people are avoiding 19th Street. So we feel that 19th Street is still appropriate for a collector-level street. Collector streets connect residential streets to arterial streets, and feel that it's important to look at the ability to put in some traffic calming, but we need to also consider the whole transportation network when we do that. And then a couple other notes as we would go through design. If we proceed with this project, we would obviously hold a public meeting halfway through to get feedback on the design elements, get feedback from this body on the design plans, if we proceed with construction in 2019, we'd like to finalize the plans by the end of this year so that we have time to get utilities relocated and any right-of-way acquired that we may need or easements over the winter so that we could get the project complete next year. So with that, I would stand for any questions that you have of me or any of the other staff members, and then certainly open it up to public comment.
Well, I'll get mine covered here with Jessica and Jeff. Jeff, for you, I'm having a little trouble figuring out the right question to ask, but as putting on a couple of hats here, the professor of urban design and the practical planner in the city of Lawrence, talk about older cities and that were initially designed as residential areas and residential streets, and now all of a sudden it's, what, 100 years later or whatever, and what's happening now is happening. And just talk about that if you could. I'd be real interested in, your perspective as an urban designer
Sure.
with that topic.
We'll preface, I'm not a professor and by any stretch of the word there, but I will do my best here. And I'll try to keep it in context with Lawrence and not in the high theoretical world where it doesn't do us any favors. The way that Lawrence was originally laid out in the old town grid was you had a series of streets that would have mainly been in a gridding pattern for just the movement of people because you didn't have vehicles and you would have had people walking and horses and any other means to get around town. So they laid them out in short grid-like fashion just to make it easy for you to go from A to B. This part of town would be very similar in that same light there. But the way that the gridding of the streets works is it kind of allowed you to have a natural bypassing technique to it. So if you ran into something on one street, you thought, you know what, I missed my turn, I could go quickly around the block. And that's kind of the way that it works there. Now, as time has gone on there, we've seen residences and just the way that we use the streets change. So we went from horses and walking to be a principal way to vehicles and other means of going that way. And this car is now the dominant force that you see in the streets. So it's been a little bit of a shift in the technology in that respect. The way that cities have kept up and the way that Lawrence has kind of kept up is the slow introduction of kind of the technology. I'm trying to think how to best phrase this without going like crazy technical real quick. It's that gridding pattern enables a different use of the streets than what we would have seen 100 years ago. And the way that vehicles now move is in a different pattern than we would have seen 100 years ago. And I think it's clear to say that we've seen some of the codes and practices, and I think a great example of this would be different things that you see in the building code and the fire code, because there is a response rate that has to occur in certain ways. So I think you've seen that shift kind of to respect and kind of go that route to make that routing occur that Chief King was speaking to earlier. The way that we've kind of seen patterning change in Lawrence is you have a little bit of a change in the way that we build and then a change in the way that households form and the way that it works. Most of the older parts of Lawrence were configured in ways that would have been a higher population in the block, not by the design of them, but by the family sizes that have been occupying the structure. So you would have seen a high amount of people coming and going just because the family structure at that point was more people per household than what we have today. So what you see is kind of a little bit of a change in the way that that works. Now the patterning that you see under like the current land development code is a very similar development style that you would see under the 1966 zoning code and even the 1949 zoning code, where you would have had lots of 5,850 square feet. They would have had accessing off the alleyways would have been your principal way of kind of ingressing and egressing the site. In the cases of the eastern side of Lawrence, where the alleyways were never constructed or they've come and they've gone in the past, accessing directly into your local street would have been the way of getting and moving about. Is that what you were kind of hoping for?
Yeah, the struggle is, 19th Street is has a lot of residential character.
Yep.
And where else do you go if you're pouring the water, from Iowa to the east? Where does the traffic go? Where do the people go? And there aren't a lot of options, but there's certainly conflict in you know, the way the city is growing and the way the city is, you know, building its infrastructure.
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to
Yeah.
get
and-
my arms around.
And we're seeing a lot of that kind of, the way that we used to know that the way that the reactions would occur is starting to change with the opening of the SLT and that K-10 kind of bypassing. So we're starting to see a little bit of the way that you move about change in some respects. But, you know, I think it's important to remember is that we've got a rather large obstacle that sits right about 15th and Iowa Street that doesn't exactly let east-west movements occur naturally. While big fan of the school and also an alumni, it sometimes becomes a traffic impedance a little bit because, you know, when you kind of go down the look, if you're going from the east side of Lawrence to, say, Iowa Street, there's a very limited number of streets that you can really connect to and make that connection. 19th is probably the first one you see on the south side of KU. You get almost up to 9th Street before you see one again on kind of that northern side of KU. So you've got quite a run in the middle there where there's just not a way to make that connection that works. And, you know, with 23rd Street you're seeing a little bit of that shift in people trying to figure out a way of going around the town with the SLT now. So I think we're going to see some of those old things that we used to know to be true in the way that traffic treats in Lawrence are probably going to start to shift as more people become aware of this is an option to move around or that this option is a little bit easier. And I think we're going to see some of that patterning shift. I don't think we're seeing the full effect of it yet. We don't have data to kind of give us an idea of what's exactly going on fully yet. But we're starting to see that kind of just in the way that people are moving around town and some of the different actions that we see in the early data.
Thanks, that was interesting and professorial.
So sorry. I tried to keep it.
Just your part, Jessica, on 19th Street, your demand model, and I recalled something a little different last November in terms of traffic increasing, I think, between Maple Lane and Harper, but maybe in no other places. I think I heard something different. So if you could just go over that part of your slide that looked at the counts that were projected in your bigger picture view along 19th Street.
Sure. It's challenging to pull numbers sometimes out of this to convey them in a way that is representative of what the model intends to convey, in the sense that different segments are going to have different trips, but you can't necessarily add them up, right? So like if there's this many trips between this segment, you can't add them to the trips between this segment, the addition of them, because those could be the same cars, and then it means the other cars are falling off, or it could mean new cars are coming in. So some of it's hard because of that. The numbers haven't changed though. What you probably heard me say before, so we looked at in the scenario A to scenario C, we went into the model and we pulled out sections. So for example, from Harper to O'Connell, I looked at the traffic volume in scenario A versus the traffic volume in scenario C on that segment. And the difference is 950 trips. So it's just under 1,000 trips between Harper and O'Connell when you not connecting versus not connecting, more trips. So I also pulled that Maple to Harper. So if you want to look at like Harper to Maple, the difference in trips between scenario A to scenario C falls to 370. So that means basically while you can't add them together and say that's a total increase in trips, it means cars are falling off then by the time that trips are getting to Harper, they're falling off, right? So there's fewer. And then if you want to go between Maple and Haskell, it's down to 150 trips a day. So you can see it's starting to, the trips related to the difference in connecting that connection. By the time you get between Mass and Haskell, it's negative 22. So there's no difference. It shows less trips if you connect than if you don't connect. So in our minds, when we look at that and when we say what's the significant information for you, it's the largest increase in trips is projected between Haskell and O'Connell. That's an 18% difference in the amount of trips between those two scenarios, not between base year and 2040. Right? And then once you get to between Haskell and Mass, the difference is negative. So there's no attributable trips in the model related to connecting 19th Street to O'Connell. Does that make sense?
Much better this
Okay.
time. It's,
Okay.
it's sinking in a little bit
Okay.
but that was very good. I don't know if this is a fair question either, because I know these models are pretty complicated, but the factors that you put in the computer to generate that number, what are those?
They're all assumptions
They're-
based on our best idea of the plans that
For
we've made.
instance, yeah, for
So,
instance.
for
2 or 3.
example, we build a street network and we classify all the streets based on what classification they are. We tell the model what number of lanes it has, so through lanes. We tell them, we show the model, we build, so you'll notice not every street is built in the model, not all the streets show up, because we're doing countywide, so we're looking high level, what are the major connections of at least collector and above streets, of how that's gonna function in terms of, for our transportation demand. Then we say, where is all the population going to be? And we build traffic analysis zones that link back to that network. So it's like a geographical area that links to the network. And then we make base year assumptions about population and employment, retail and non-retail, because there's different trip generation factors based on the type of employment and retail or non-retail that's there. And then the model does trip assignment, which says we know that how people are moving and the way that they're going to move based on the network, based on these origins and destinations. Then there's something called a travel delay, which basically in the model calibrates based on the speed, the link segment, the level of congestion of all the other cars on the roadway. It uses a relationship called volume delay function to route trips. So once a trip is going to see too much delay, it routes it to another street. So for example, if you build a street, if you got a typical collector street that was built 50 years ago versus something that's built today, which under city policy allows traffic calming, those wouldn't necessarily get assigned trips in the same way, because at some point, based on the number of lanes that are there and the classification of that street, it attributes that trip delay differently. So once the trip becomes less attractive to take based on the level of service in the model, it routes people different ways.
Okay, I promised my last
Okay.
question without being on a shot clock here. Are you ever surprised with the results? I mean,
Yes.
do your gut feelings, and you're like, oh gee, that's really not
So-
what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, so yes, K10 and SLT is a good example of that. So if you think about when we are talking about these history of plans, right, for decades, completing the SLT, has showed up in the model in terms of the west leg that's already built, has showed up, in terms of our future year projections as something that, what happens as that starts to open. And this is the first time where in a model, we've now modeled the east leg, which has been built, and looking at, we are validating that out based on existing counts. So that's a time where we've had to look at and see how it's performing, and we still don't know enough, but we validate it based on what we have now, our best guess. Anything can change in terms of model scenarios. If we don't, regionally, we're looking at adding 20,000 people or 40,000 people and 20,000 jobs between now and 2040. Well, if something changes in that, obviously there's going to be change in what the demand estimations are for what the model is assuming, which is the benefit of us taking this estimate of trying this planning technique every 5 years when we develop a new plan. So 5 years from now, we do the projects in the short term, we do this again, and we take another look at it. It's based on assumptions, and you have to take your best guess.
Thank you, that was very good.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
I have a question for Jessica.
Oh, yep.
Sorry. Do you have enough history with this model to know that a project that you modeled and then came to fruition?
I really
out?
don't. So this is the second model update process I've been involved in, but I didn't lead the last one, so I was really not involved in the details of it. We also don't go, the model technology has changed. So oftentimes they update the software and you can't pull some of the old files into your new software. So I don't even have the capability, like if I go back to these plans to look, I was hoping to be able to put together a picture for you to look, to show what all the base years of these models have looked like over time and projections. But like when I get back to 2030, it was done by a consultant. I don't even have model files. So the time it would take to do that to guess, we are already on to the next plan, and we haven't ever taken a look back to see how our assumptions, I mean, you'd have to go back and say, have the assumptions changed? Did this, to see if it would be validated.
Jessica, I got a simple
Okay.
question.
Okay.
On your slide on the travel demand model, I believe it says 18.1%, and then it has a /1000.
Yes.
Can you explain that? I thought I heard you say earlier that's,
That's the
No more than
difference in
1,000, or-
trips.
okay.
So that's not the number of trips on that segment. What that represents is the difference in trips between connecting and not connecting. So regardless, that land use has trip generation happening because there's residential and industrial or commercial properties, right? And so the difference in trips between connecting and not connecting is an increase of 18.1%, which is about 1,000
Okay.
trips. That's not the volume that's projected.
So what is the volume that's projected?
For example, from Harper to O'Connell in scenario A, it's about 6,300. It's about 5,300 on scenario C. So that's about 18% of the total trips is 1,000. So
And so the current number of trips, the no-build scenario assumes that there's no access, right?
correct, but that there's still uses there, that the uses, we might still project that there's maybe higher intensity residential or more commercial or more industrial, a different use that still generates trips.
So what is the current trip count? Is it close to that no-build scenario, or?
The base, well, I didn't have there's no count from east of Harper. So I can't tell you what a current count is. The closest we have in the base year, it estimated at about 5,000. Today, it's probably under that. Maple to Harper was, in 13, it was 5,100, and in 17, it was 3,800.
Okay.
So, but that's the closest segment we have to look at.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Could I hear from the police department? I was curious on your, if you feel that I don't know if you have any response time requirements like the fire department?
I'm Adam Heffley with the Lawrence Police Department. We aren't governed by the same accreditation document that the fire department uses. Our response times are a little different because we typically deploy from floating in the community model as opposed to a station model. Really, my input in this is supporting Chris King's comments. The transponder OPCOM is not something we'd like to get in the business of. It's additional equipment on a car that's already fairly taxed, additional costs, and gates, things like that. But other than that, this has been a good education for me too. So,
Okay, thank you.
mhm.
What is the width of the street from Harper to Mass?
From Harper to Mass, I believe it's 31 feet back of curb to back of curb. So we went back and kind of retrofitted bike lanes in, about the narrowest you can do for having marked bike lanes and 3 lanes of traffic, so that leaves 2 10-foot lanes of traffic and 2 5-foot bike lanes. It's 30 foot inside curb to inside curb, but 31 foot back to back.
Okay, and are there sections with middle turn lane?
Not between Harper and Massachusetts, except, well, at Haskell there might be for the intersection. I believe there is at Haskell. left turn lane,
Center turn lane.
center turn lane. But there's no center turn lane, just a left turn lane at the intersection. Not till you get, there's a center turn lane closer to Lawrence High, which would be west of Mass.
Okay. I have one more. So, say you were to do some sort of access management, hold on. Yeah, so in the option of minimizing need for a turn lane, would it be narrower or the same width? The median would be, need to be the same width as a middle turn lane, or?
For consistency of the roadway width, and we look at having the turn lane be 11 foot, that we would just carry that 11 foot into the median. So the median would be 11 foot median.
If you don't do a turn lane, you could do a median, it wouldn't need to be 11 foot.
That's,
what
okay.
And then, just out of curiosity, it says options for traffic calming devices from Haskell to Harper. I only ask because since the traffic calming policy is changing, what would that, those other things be potential than what we have now, I guess?
Yeah, and I know our traffic calming policy, we have a moratorium that we're looking at revising the policy, but that being said, with the new policy, whatever that may entail, I think it'd be appropriate for us to look at different options to include traffic calming from Haskell to O'Connell, whatever those options may be. And those would be things that we would bring in front of this group to get feedback on.
Any other questions? I think we're ready to open it up to public comment, so if you could come forward, and I'm sorry, Steve already said this, I was a couple minutes late. You have 3 minutes, and I see we have a shot clock tonight, so that's kind of nice. Please state your name, and I believe we have a sheet up there to sign in.
Okay. Hi, my name is Travis Robinette. I live at 1402 West 22nd Street. I'm the chair of the Schwegler Neighborhood Association Board of Directors, and our neighborhood voted unanimously to join the 19th Street Neighborhood Coalition. And I just wanted to clarify a few things based on what I just heard, that we're for an emergency and a transit connection. I don't feel like that those arguments are necessarily relevant to a motor vehicle connection. It's really not an either or. We can have a closed motor vehicle connection with access to transit and emergency vehicles. We can make it for bikes, emergency buses, pedestrians, and keep cars away from a road that's essentially entirely housing. I also wanted to say that the traffic count 5% decrease west of Naismith, that must have been before the Central District opened the new student housing over there, because we've seen a pretty notable increase lately. And also, according to those models, it looks like 23rd Street has some room to accommodate more traffic. Our suggestion improves the infrastructure and sustainable transportation. We're still rebuilding the water. We're still repaving the pavement. We're still putting in sidewalks and bike lanes. We're still putting in a transit access. Ventura Hills and East Hills are just as accessible by 23rd Street by car as they are by 19th. They would only shave a minute or two at most. And the emergency response is also accommodated by a gated connection. So really, sitting here, I didn't hear myself personally much of a need for a car connection at 19th and O'Connell that would trump the desires of a coalition of 5 neighborhood associations that live along 19th Street. And also, if you want cars off the road, which it pretty clearly says we want to make people go to more sustainable options in the T2040 plan, you make it more convenient to bike or to ride the bus. So really, and then you look at the model as well, and it looks like there's only a slight increase in the model with the connection. So to me, that sounds like there's not much of a demand or a need for a car connection if there's only going to be that slight of an increase. And the model could always be off. People in a lot of cities around the country right now, including where I'm from in Austin, 50 years ago, they never expected the population growth that they've seen. They didn't plan for it, and now they're in a big pickle. And so models that are just the best guess, it doesn't sound super confident that they 100% can keep cars off the road. So why risk the car connection when we can accommodate everything else? So thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. My name's Kirsten Yanuba Stevens. People are creatures of habit, and so the people that are already cutting across on Harper and Haskell to use 19th will continue to do so and may do it at O'Connell. But new people are not going to start doing that if they're not already in the habit of cutting across on 19th to use that as going up to Iowa. I don't live on 19th Street, so I'm not going to say whether it should be through or not. What I do is I commute on bike to work, and I commute home on 19th Street. And yes, there are some nice 5.5-foot bike lanes that are around Naismith, and there's some really skinny, nasty ones that are a little bit. But I want to encourage whatever you decide, that there are bike lanes, that we keep the east-west route open for bikes, to keep them off the sidewalks and to keep them off 23rd Street. Thank you.
My name's John Bowen. I live at 403 Dakota. My first thought was to cut that right off of it so it doesn't go through 19th Street. But I come from a background of fire and that so forth, so I understand that because I was in the insurance business for 30 years and brought up on that. And I think that she mentioned, and I think the idea is if we can cut the traffic, car traffic down, people from going in those areas, or make it easier, because that's going all the way through a lot of housing. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have. I mean, we have a problem of cutting off at 23rd Street and coming down our street. And if we can keep trucks off of that, that would be a big thing, because they can turn around. They can go turn around in those parks and get in and out. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ray Beaumont. For 30 years, I lived within stone throw of the roundabout at 19th and Barker. And just from that history alone, I can tell you I've sat there many times and watched the traffic backed up, not just to the traffic circle, but I mean heading back down towards Haskell. So there's always a lot of traffic on that. Since then, I've purchased a house on 1211 East 19th Street. I'm amazed at the amount of traffic that's on that street every day, during the school day, during weekends. It's packed all the time. Even this morning, I was sitting at the light at Haskell, trying to go west. I sat through 2 cycles of that light, just because it was moving that slow. And that's a regular occurrence. As far as the fire department access, I was a firefighter for the military for 30 years. We love to drive fast, straight. We want to go right there. We don't want any turns, gates, anything. But being in the military, there was a lot of gated areas that we couldn't just have open. We had cards. This was back in the old days. We had to punch a card in the deal, the gate would open, we'd go into the area. They've got these transponders now. That's really pretty cool. But we followed the NFPA guidelines too. We had certain requirements that we had to get to different places at different times. We met all those through the use of those type of gates. During the spring and summer of 2017, as I was working the whole 19th Street Coalition effort in the name of Barker Neighborhood, I talked to most people on 19th Street, and nobody that lives on that street supports this idea at all. Nobody that I've talked to. I think the idea of improving that section between Harper and O'Connell is a great idea. I think upgrading it's a great idea. I think the bike path is a great idea. Just don't open it to more traffic. We can't take any more traffic on 19th Street. Thank you.
Hello, I'm George Laupy. I appreciate the opportunity to express my concerns. What I'm concerned about is that short east end of 19th Street. One of the reasons I'm representing the Lawrence Antique Automobile Club. In a month, the 4th, 5th, and 6th of April, we will be offering our 55th annual Antique Automobile Swap Meet. We're one of the largest organizations that uses that fairgrounds. One of our problems recently has been traffic on 19th Street. When we started 55 years ago, there was no problem. We were east of town, out in the fairgrounds. But what happens many times, even though we advertise and draw maps, we have those vendors coming in with their trucks loaded, and our maximum has been 700 vendors in 1 year. The Chamber of Commerce, we don't know how many because we don't try to take an accurate count, but the Chamber of Commerce at that time was suggesting and estimating that we were getting 10,000 people to come to the city of Lawrence. We know now that it's way over 5,000. But part of the problem is we could not draw maps and inform everybody of how to get into the fairgrounds. For the last few years, we've been using that new east entrance, but some of the vendors don't know about that, so they come up Harper. They get to 19th Street and we can't accommodate them. So many of them say, well, I'll just make a right turn, I'll go around the block. There is no block to go around, so where they end up? In the mobile home park. I can't tell you how many vendors I've seen doing that. We have to do a better job of signage. If you go to 19th and Harper and look east, you won't see a sign that says dead end. You won't see a sign. It's very difficult to get things, signage around Lawrence. About 25 years ago, this club offered to put up a big new sign on 23rd Street, said 4-H Fairgrounds. We didn't succeed. We could not convince the city, even though it wouldn't cost the city anything. Guess what? 2 years ago, we got Craig Weinog to put a sign up that's about the size of this thing, said Fairgrounds on 23rd Street. So what we'd like to have this year is some help from this Transportation Committee. For many years, we've looked at the east end of 19th, and here there's huge poles keeping the road from being open. We were out there a few days ago, and boy, was we excited. The poles are gone, and there's gates in there. So what we would like to be able to do this year and in the future, put those 2,500 people that are coming on exit and going out that way, rather than send them back into Harper Street or on 19th Street.
You're at 3 minutes and 39 seconds, so if you can wrap up your
that
comments,
gives
that'd be great.
vendors two options, either going east, that would be our recommendation, or bring them back into town, which we have been doing for 50 years. So as a citizen of Lawrence, tax-paying, non-voting person, I'd like to see my tax dollars spent to open that up so that we can accommodate the visitors that come to Lawrence and participate in our antique auto swap meet. Thank you.
Thank you.
please. Try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. There are a lot of people that want to speak tonight.
Okay.
So.
I'm Joe Arneson. I'm chairman of the swap meet that we have out there. And to follow up on what George has said, our main concern, if we could open up 19th just for that weekend, the 4th, 5th, and 6th of May, so we could bring our vendors and our buyers in on 19th Street to get them off of Harper, because we get such a backup coming from 23rd down Harper to try to pull into our public parking. And some, like you said, some of the vendors get lost and they don't come in at the right gate they're supposed to. It would help the community there as far as getting in and out, because on Friday afternoon and Saturday morning, we have it up and down the street there blocked off where people can't get into their homes and stuff. If they could go out 19th Street, they could get out or go on to work or whatever and get out on 23rd Street. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Steve Kelly. I live at 4529 Broadmoor Drive in Lawrence, and I also work for the chamber. And when we learned about this, we informed a number of the current tenants at East Hills to get their views of what they thought. And certainly, I'm not a traffic engineer, and it was certainly information overload for me in terms of the statistics. But we thought it was important for the current tenants out there to have some input. And I believe that you did get input from several. I think it was provided to city staff, so you may or may not have seen that. But one of the folks who did respond is Sandy Dixon, and she's the plant manager for Plasticon, which is one of the East Hills tenants. And she gave me authority, or asked that I read her very brief statement and commentary on this. And she said, basically, we feel like we need the street improvements and connection for our employees for the following reasons. Bike access. Several employees have tried to ride to work but are unable to keep it up due to the lack of bike lanes on 23rd Street to the south and on North 1500th Road on the north. Exiting from the business park on 23rd Street is also extremely limited at certain times, particularly in game days on those kinds of events. Transit to East Lawrence, North Lawrence, and Northwest Lawrence would be a much shorter commute for a number of our employees were this to be an option. There was also a comment about improving the emergency response times, and also the possibility for increased bus routes to serve both East Hills and then the now developing Venture Park. She also commented, I do not believe that truck traffic will increase on 19th because large trucks tend to avoid additional stops and curves and will opt for use of the bypass for western travel to I-70 and to K-10 for access east. Thank you.
My name's Bill Myers, live at 1830 Harper, and I was not planning on speaking, but I haven't heard one comment about Harper Street itself from 19th to 15th. And to me, that is a major problem. I think the idea of improvements from Harper Street on out to O'Connell is a good idea. That street definitely needs some improvement. I think the items that have been brought up about emergency access are good. I sympathize with the people on down 19th, but if we've got to sacrifice something, let's at least keep the problem on 19th and not keep it on Harper going on down to 15th and the rest of East Lawrence. Right now on Harper Street, basically all the residences there have parking off-street. So usually you go down it, there's no parking on either side of the street. As a result of that, there's only two ways to go north. That's to go down to Haskell or go down to Harper. A lot of people are using that Harper Street down to 15th Street. The only impediment of traffic is the curve once you get down to East Glen to go to 15th. That slows traffic a little. But right now, there is a speeding problem on that street and quite a lot of traffic. So whatever is done on this project, please look at the need for controlling traffic on Harper itself from 19th Street to 15th Street. We do not want to funnel more traffic down into that residential area. There's no need for it. So at least please consider that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dietrich Earnhardt. I live at 1714 Mississippi Street, which is part of the University Place neighborhood where Steve lives. Our neighborhood is part of the 19th Street Neighborhood Coalition, and we just want to reiterate 3 points that'll come across this evening. One is, please repave the street between O'Connell and Harper. That's great. Keep it at 22 feet. Secondly, we would be to put up a gate that would allow only emergency vehicle response so they can maintain their response time and for transit access. Put in the bike lanes, sidewalks, great, but no car access. Third piece would be proactive and identify other ways to access the Venture Park. Surely there are other ways off of 23rd Street, such as at the Franklin intersection. I teach economics at the University of Kansas. I generate a fair number of economic models that explore human behavior. If I constructed a model that tweaked one element, such as opening up access to cars at O'Connell and 19th Street, and I generated a negative number of a change in traffic at Massachusetts and 19th Street, I would start to question strongly whether or not I've constructed a proper model. If only one thing changes, and it can only change traffic in one direction, that is an increase, and yet my model generates a negative change, something's wrong. I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Allman. I'm in Brook Creek neighborhood, which voted unanimously to come up with an alternative to the project that you're now considering. This is the basic message from our coalition, but I want to point out before I get into it that some people view this project from the east, from Venture Business Park, and the health and the viability of Venture Business Park. And that's good. And some people view this project from the west, from the neighborhoods, from the health and safety of the neighborhoods, and that's good too. I think we need to do both. And I don't think we really need to be at cross purposes. This is who we are for neighborhoods, approximately 9,700 people who vote. We've been working on this and proposing things since 2016, although Brook Creek has been on it since 2011, before Venture Business Park was even platted. The situation we see with the street is problematic. Basically, it's taking Venture Business Park streets and pushing them right into the heart of our neighborhood. It's the exact same street that now exists in Venture Business Park. The 2012 traffic impact study indicated 3,884 additional vehicle trips per day just from Venture Business Park. It didn't address where the other traffic was going to be coming from that would be attracted to this welcome mat, this brand new street, this glorious street that everybody's going to say, ooh. The T2040 plan claims that 19th Street corridor is important for the increasing capacity to carry more traffic. It's to carry more traffic. That's what this is for. Cut-through traffic that originates from 23rd Street, it always has, it will continue. Also 31st Street, because that's going to be connected through Franklin Road as it is now with O'Connell, which are both going to be arterial streets. And then increase in game day traffic from its existing level. There's going to be a lot more traffic as far as we can see. Although the other side of the picture, staff says, oh, don't worry, it's going to be great. Quote, we have no plans to widen the rest of 19th Street, parentheses, at the moment. Quote, traffic modeling shows no increase west of Haskell. I think maybe it's actually, what, 3%, something like that. And will deter traffic with traffic calming. Why build a huge street and then try to deter traffic? These are what we're being told. Well, which is it? Is it going to be more traffic or not? They can't have it both ways. If the connection increases 19th Street corridor traffic, that harms our neighborhood's livability. It also violates the city strategic plan directive, safe and healthy and welcoming neighborhoods.
You're at
Well,
3
these
minutes,
are compelling
Michael.
reasons for the project not to be built. So the connection does not increase traffic, then the wider street's not warranted. This project wastes $3.625 million, should not be built. This is what they say they have to rebuild the street because the PCI is so low. It's been consistently 49.6 since 2009 until last year it plummeted. Why? It's sound. It does need some patches like that little area in the foreground. They can remove the subgrade and patch it and mill and overlay it. We want to retain the open ditches, superior stormwater drainage. The same process was done in Haskell last year. Much worse deterioration. They removed and repaired the subgrade and then mill and overlaid. This is a truck route. Certainly that's doable on 19th Street. Same with Boleyn Avenue. This street is in even worse shape, but it has a PCI of 47. Can't believe it. And yet they're not going to even mill and overlay it. They're going to spray paint it. It's called microservicing. This is inconsistent. So this is what we propose. A gate at O'Connell, operable by emergency and transit vehicles only. It would be, as our rough estimate, $50,000 to $100,000. Don't hold me to it. That's from research on the internet. Certainly cheaper than $3.265 million. Delete the CIP project. Include a mill and overlay in the comprehensive street maintenance program this year as its own project. The street can be repaved. We'd love to have water line upgrades. They're done routinely and without rebuilding any street in town. Sidewalks, shared use paths, we welcome that. And there's a historical memorandum of understanding to retain those stormwater ditches. So that's basically what we're saying. We think it meets all the criteria and the goals that Public Works has been repeating year after year. And it meets the goal of protecting our neighborhoods as well. So that's all I needed to offer you this evening, and I appreciate your time.
Good evening. My name is Pat Cady, and I live in the Barker neighborhood. No one's mentioned the schools. There are 3 schools that are on 19th Street. I think we can assume that the models and all this talk has been, we've found our way to realizing that this is connection, if it goes through, will increase traffic. And what happens to the pedestrians who are walking to those schools? Kennedy is not right on 19th Street, but kids cross that right there to Kennedy all the time. Cordley, built in 1915, has been on 19th Street for all these years. There are many, many kids crossing all along Massachusetts and across 19th. And then Lawrence High. Have you ever driven by there when kids are leaving that parking lot? I mean, it's crazy. So that is another factor in the whole idea of increasing traffic all along 19th Street. And I see I have another 2 minutes, so I did want to talk to, I forget who the man was that came from the chamber. Yeah, it's my understanding from the letters that were shared with us, and I appreciate the city doing that, that the letters from the business people in East, what is that called? East Hills, were solicited by the city, and talking points were sent to them by the city, so that they were asked essentially to write a letter in support, plain and simple. That strikes me as being, well, it seems unprofessional. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Lynn Henderson. I live in Brook Creek neighborhood. And as Michael Almond said, we've been on this since at least 2011 when Dave Corliss was still here. And this wasn't about Venture Park at all. It didn't even exist. And we've been dealing with the city on this ever since. So tonight, I'm here to talk about process, because that's usually a lot of what I focus on. And I'm furious with the process. And I'm going to try to stay calm for 2.5 more minutes. And my fury is not really directed at you all, but I want it on the record. And I want to thank Pat Cady for having psychic ability to set this up so perfectly with her reference to the chamber soliciting positive comments, or no, to the staff soliciting positive comments from the chamber for East Hills Business Park. That's wrong. That is just wrong. And what it looks like to me is staff was going through the comments and noticed there were over 31 individual comments from residents around that area and said, oh my God, nobody wants this. Well, what can we do? Well, it's March 20th, 2018. Maybe we can get some comments from East Hills. And by golly, they did. Not until the 28th. Must have been a little blip in the communication. But Steve referenced Sandy's letter, I believe, Sandy Dixon. And on one of her bullet points, exit from the business park on 23rd Street is extremely limited on game days. Has she ever been on 19th Street on a game day? Because I think we all have, and it's already bad. So, sorry, no sympathy on that one. And a lot of the comments, bullet points were about, you know, we want to be able to walk to work. We want to be able to bike to work. We can do that without connecting to O'Connell, except for emergency vehicles. You can get a bicycle through a gate. You can walk through a gate. So, I'm losing my time, and I thank you for the opportunity to comment. It's Palm Sunday, and I'm late for church. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sharon Ashworth. I live at 1714 Mississippi Street. That is 2 blocks north of 19th. I work on Harper, and so I travel 19th daily by car and by bike. And so I want to reiterate the concern I have about the school crossings. Every day you see high schoolers playing Frogger across 19th Street, if anybody remembers what Frogger was. Then we have Quarterly and Kennedy. Kids and families are traveling across 19th Street daily, and I worry about the increase in traffic and the speed at which that traffic will be going. I know Mr. Cronin talked about data of cars coming from Venture Park, from the business parks. That data, I don't believe, included cut-through traffic. That was only for the business right there. So I worry about the cut-through traffic, people bailing from 23rd to get on 19th to get to the university's new central district. So I worry about the increase in traffic. I think a gate, a transponder gate or something similar to that is a very reasonable idea for emergency access and transit access. I'm a little bit dissatisfied with the response to that. I was actually looking forward to hearing a response to what might be the concerns about a gate. But there's no failure rate data that was produced. It was just this idea that maybe it would fail. I guess I would like to see some data on that. And I'd like to hear about some examples from other cities. I was glad to hear that there was some comment about a military emergency response system that worked quite well with a gate. So I'd like to hear some more about that. I also would hate to think that the marketability and the use of the building up of the business park would actually hinge on whether or not somebody had to travel a couple blocks out of their way to access it by the 23rd Street rather than 19th Street. Yes, it'll be easier for some people, certainly a smaller proportion of the people than who live in that area on 19th, that live along those neighborhoods. The amount of people working in those areas is a smaller portion of that population. And like I said, I hate to think the marketability of that place would hinge on whether or not they have access by 19th Street. It's a couple blocks away to 23rd Street. 23rd Street was built to handle that traffic. Maybe there's another way to look at for emergency transit access there. But I don't believe car traffic, the connection to car traffic, is going to serve our city's plans for a sustainable, walkable, livable community. And I say that not representing the Sustainability Advisory Board, but I am a member of the Sustainability Advisory Board, and these are the things we look at. And I have to say I was really disappointed in the fact that we didn't sort of live up to that ideal with Cassold, and I know city staff supported the rebuilding of Cassold in a more sustainable way and on the street diet, and I certainly supported that. But that wasn't done. Here's an opportunity to maybe do that on this street, to make the sidewalks and the bike lanes, but it doesn't include the car connection. Thank you.
I'm Jane Gibson. I live on 19th Street. I thought somebody who lives on 19th Street ought to speak. So it seems like we have this historical momentum behind this project, historical momentum that predates Venture Park. And I'm not sure why there are all these commitments to this project, but it seems that those commitments have existed really in the absence of need. And I'd like to, instead of just repeating what I think were valid points made by a lot of people, I'd like to speak to the neighborhood issue, because I agree that Lawrence needs its jobs, and Venture Park will eventually perhaps provide some of those. But we need our neighborhoods. And moving cars and getting people jobs is only a part of what the quality of life here hinges upon. Most of our quality of life is in our neighborhoods. And we're talking about a project that will compromise the neighborhoods down 19th Street. I'm right on 19th, and we have tons of traffic now. If you've ever tried to cross the intersection at Leonard and 19th where I live, I mean, it's a dangerous venture, even now. And I agree with Dr. Earnhardt that there's something wrong in the model if you can generate a negative number in the model for traffic downsizing as a result of the expansion to the east. It's counterintuitive to suggest that's the case. And since we really already have so much traffic on that street, and traffic means noise, and it means fumes, and it means higher risk for pedestrians, for children, for adults, for people who are out walking dogs. We really don't want to do anything that would increase the traffic because that compromises the quality of life in our neighborhoods. Let me tell you just a little bit about our neighborhood. We are a pedestrian neighborhood. We walk a lot. We bicycle a lot. You can go out and walk the Borough Street Trail, and you can see all your friends and neighbors, and people stop and talk from their front porches and out in their gardens all along 19th Street, because this is where people live. Moving cars is just a part of what we do. We live there, and we talk to each other, and we enjoy each other's company. And we have these beautiful shade trees and this lovely canopy in our neighborhood, and we think that that's really worth preserving. And since there are other ways to meet the emergency vehicle need and other ways to deliver traffic into the Venture Park once the Venture Park really takes off, we don't really need to undermine the quality of life in Lawrence neighborhoods to achieve those goals. Thank you.
My name's Margaret Coggins, and I'm a resident of the University Place neighborhood, and I support the 19th Street Neighborhood Coalition, and I just hope tonight that you will listen to all the recommendations they've made. And I want to thank you for the time you give for this project.
Bonnie Uffman. I live in the Barker neighborhood, and I support the 19th Street Coalition. I'm not up here right now because I have anything new to add, but I still want to put in my 2 cents worth. I am impressed with what I am hearing from my neighbors. It all makes sense to me. I don't want to see additional traffic on 19th Street, as do most of the rest of the people I've heard from. It seems obvious to me that opening to O'Connell Road would be an invitation to increase traffic on a narrow residential street, and that concerns me a lot. The numbers don't convince me. I talk, as I generally do, from a gut level common sense approach. It just makes sense. You invite them, they will come. That is what happens. I want to say something about the process also of what's been happening over the years. I feel pretty tired and discouraged. I've been addressing groups about this for 5 years, more or less. I don't know the exact year this started, but it seems like it goes on and on. City staff holds meetings so stakeholders have an opportunity to say what they want to say. We stakeholders come and say what we want to say, and nothing has changed. And that just gets really discouraging. It discourages people from continuing to come and speak their piece, because it sounds like no one's listening anyway when that happens year after year. It just seems like it takes an incredible amount of persistence, and I'm amazed that we're also so persistent that there are this many people here yet tonight. We do care about what happens in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
My name is John Olson. I live in the Brookwood neighborhood. My concern is not one way or the other on whether you connect it to the O'Connell Road or not. My main issue right now is this project for Harper to O'Connell dead end. The road is in such rotten condition now. What does someone, mainly the city, plan to do on the terrible road now to hold it up for another year and a half, since you say it's not going to be started till summer? Which again, how you plan on, if you start in the summer of 19, to have it completed before winter hits. But my main concern is who's going to take care of this road and keep it travelable, that's a bad word, but for people to travel on that go in and out of the trailer court. Plus the Humane Society is getting ready to build a brand new huge thing. And with all the heavy equipment going in and out of there, that's just going to make the road just crumble to nothing. Plus, in the last 2 years, in 17, they say it's had 4 water breaks. I've counted 7 in 2 years. I count the concrete patches that the city's come out and laid over where their water line breaks are. How much money's been spent on taxpayers' money to fix all these things continuously for the last 5 years? When the road was obviously in terrible shape when I moved into that area 12 years ago. Plus you have a salvage yard that has at least 15 semi-trucks come in and out of there every day. Every day. That takes a road that's already nothing into even worse. I call the city, maybe 3 times a month to let them know about, here we go, another pothole. Here we go, another pothole. Have you ever seen what an alligator's back looks like, or a crocodile's back? You drive up and down that road, it didn't show it very well in some of the pictures projected tonight, but alligatoring is nothing but cracked chunks all the way up and down the road. And every time we get cold or freeze or water and more heavy traffic travel on it, what's that do? Creates more heavy chuck holes, big things. And it takes usually a week for someone to come out and throw a little patch in it, and then, another cold, another 2 or 3 weeks later, and the 4 patch they put in doesn't exist anymore. One of the big concrete pads that they came and they laid down on 19th Street from one of the bigger water breaks, not even 2 years old. It's alligator, and that's concrete. That was a very cheap job, but yet it cost a lot of people a lot of money to keep going out there and doing that. But again, my main concern is what does the city plan to do for this strip of road to get through another year? That's my main concern. If we open it up at O'Connell, we open it up. That's progress. Things happen. There's plenty of streets that are busy or busier that go through neighborhoods. I don't necessarily want to see it get busier, but how much money did the city spend to extend Connell Road all the way up to that?
Got
And
3
if it
minutes
gets
and 30
turned
seconds.
down, how's the city going to tell the taxpayers that, well, we spent a lot of money on a dead-end road to nowhere? I don't understand quite, what you do at that particular point on that. But I guess all in all, I guess I would say keep it closed, just for the traffic part of it. But again, the main thing for me, again, is just making sure it's taken care of well to get us through another whole year before, you get to the point where there's a lot of accidents. People can't walk, they can't ride bikes, they can't do anything on that road. So anyway, thank you for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brian Fuller. I'm a business owner on 19th Street. I'm actually one of 2 on the south side of the road from Harper. So I'm right at that intersection. And I agree with a lot of what he said about the road. It's a terrible condition and it's hard on vehicles. I've had to replace a lot of front ends on my vehicles just driving down that road the last couple of years. I believe it's had a lot of impact on them. But and I'm not sure, I've learned a lot tonight because I've been trying to, learn as much as I could about the whole process myself. And I don't want a lot more traffic necessarily, but as a business owner, I think it's a good thing to open. Maybe consider the other comments about gates. That's understandable too. But the road has no lighting on it. It's a dangerous road. Myself, I've almost ran people over on it, leaving after the sun's down, because it's so dark over there. But I just want you to know I'm for the road being finished and completed in one manner or another. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments? back to commission for discussion.
I have some questions.
Great.
Dave, this might be for you, but the 47 feet, I'm just kind of curious if the justification for that is just the center turn lane, or if there's other reasons that that road needs to be that wide for that setback.
The 47-foot includes the center turn lane, but it also includes bike lanes. So it's basically 3 11-foot lanes, including the center turn lane, 10 foot of bike lanes, 43 feet, and then 2 foot of curb and gutter on either side.
So the bike lanes you mentioned on the other sections of 19th Street are 5 feet. So this is 6.5 feet. So
from the travel lane to the face of the curb, it would be 6.5 feet.
I guess I'm trying to account for the 16 extra feet, like compared to the other segments of road you mentioned from Harbor to Mass. The bike lanes being larger, I think, one of the members of the public mentioned that would be nice to have them consistently larger. But it seems as if the center turn lane, to me at least, that seems like the thing that really starts to stretch the width of the road. And I didn't know if there was anything about the emergency access or any other reasons why that would need to be there.
The center turn lane provides safety benefits for traffic that's turning left to get out of the through lane, but also, where we don't need that and having a raised median, the raised median helps calm speeds of traffic by having a raised median, having narrower corridor versus having a wider street without a raised median. It also gives the ability to have mid-block crosswalks where you have a break and you're able to cross the street half at a time. So there's some benefits to having that room, whether or not there's a turn lane there or not, if it's a raised median, a grass median, to have a calming effect to the road and having safety benefits for crossing.
Okay, I'm sure you got some questions too. I have a lot of questions. I just didn't want to dominate all this. So. The sidewalk widths, did we already hear about that? 6 foot sidewalk?
I believe that's what we would recommend. Based off of the code, a collector street is 5 foot. And so originally this was a minor arterial. I think when we were talking about it first, a couple of years ago, we've downgraded it. So by the code, it would be 5 feet. I can't remember what we did on O'Connell from north of 23rd Street, if that's 6 or 5, but we would likely just do the same and carry it through. So a final decision, I don't think it's been made, but we would have sidewalk on both sides. So
Kind of curious with fairgrounds there, if there's sufficient potential demand for pedestrian activity that it might need to be even larger. So I know there's been some discussion. Can't explain exactly where I know this, but I think it was in the site plan for the fairgrounds renovation that was done. There was some concern or interest in trying to create a path kind of around the perimeter of the fairgrounds as a walking path. Maybe this is an opportunity to put in at least a piece of that along 19th. And the shared use path would be probably a better walking path than, just a standard 5 foot sidewalk. So I'm just curious if that, like a typical road, maybe a collector street, 5 feet makes sense, but if there's a particular land use that might draw a lot of pedestrian activity, then maybe a larger sidewalk or a shared use path might also make sense.
yeah, it may, Commissioner. I'm not aware of the site plan in the pedestrian network with the fairgrounds and how that tied in, but it's something we can look at.
Keep going? Come on, guys. All right.
I've got stuff too.
Is there a
but I
plan
think
for,
Katie ought to jump in.
lighting was mentioned, but I was also curious about trees and other amenities that would often go along a street to make it more comfortable to use by pedestrians? Is that,
That would be something that we would consider with the design.
and I wasn't familiar with the school bus traffic on that area, and just kind of curious about, are there particular areas, maybe near the trailer park, where kids are getting on and off buses, and how does that get factored into the design work that would be done? Is that standard, or is that something we'd have to call out?
It's something that we could look at with the design. I don't think you particularly need to call it out. We look at those type of things when we're looking at the project, so.
Are there school buses there now?
Well, I'm sure the neighborhood can speak to it. I'm sure we have buses that are picking up. In general, we try not, I'm sure First Student tries not to pick up on major streets like that. They'll try to go through into the neighborhood and pick up there and have kids walk to a spot. I'm not saying that they don't ever stop there. I don't know the stops right off the top of my head, but we can certainly look that up. But as far as stopping in general, on major or on larger streets, we try to prevent that if we can.
Was there, in the design, I know I saw on your last slide, there was sort of a list of ideas, and one of them was about a raised mid-block crossing. Has that, that'd be similar to the ones that are where the Burroughs Creek Trail cross at 19th? Is that what we're talking about? Like those sorts of crossings? Is that?
I don't know how we would signal it, whether it would be by beacon or raised crosswalk or those details. I don't know. I mean, on the Burrow Creek crossing, there's different types of crossing. We have pedestrian hybrid beacons at 11th and 19th, and raised crosswalk at 15th. So it could be either of those. We'd want to see what the warrants are for putting a signal in before we did that. But we just, I just wanted to point it out that that's something that we need to look at. Knowing that we got residential on the north side and the fairgrounds on the south side, and would want to find some place to have a good, safe crossing. And so, whether it's a raised crosswalk or marked crosswalk or a signal, all those options would be evaluated during the design phase.
That would also, that'd be something the school district would support as well, because there's potential for kids crossing there going to Kennedy, as was mentioned.
I can. Any more questions for me?
Yes. Several months ago, staff presented an analysis of collector streets with driveways, trying to get to this question we had about the traffic calming policy. And I don't recall exactly the specifics, but it seemed like there were certain streets where there were a high number of driveways that directly access the collector street. And I was kind of curious if this is one of those, if 19th Street was one of those that got flagged as kind of a collector with a lot of driveways.
Well, up until this update with the transportation plan, all of 19th Street's been a minor arterial.
Okay.
And so by that policy, it wasn't eligible for traffic calming. So I don't know if we know of the number of driveways. I know there's, especially as you get further to the east, Harper to Haskell, there's a bunch of driveways on 19th. There's probably some more. With that policy, it was, I think, 50% of the driveways. If there's 50% more of the adjacent properties had driveway on the collector street, it met that criteria of the traffic calming policy, even if it didn't meet the other criteria.
That was the fourth criteria.
Right, that's what I was trying to get to, but I realize now that at that time when we talked about that, that was probably still a minor arterial, so.
Yeah, if you're looking off that old policy based, even if you were to disregard the minor arterial or collector, segments through here like Harper to Maple here and Haskell have more than 50% driveways.
So potentially I don't know how the traffic policies, the calming policy is going to be rewritten, but based on that old standard, there would be traffic calming all up and down 19th Street, potentially.
Potentially.
Regardless of the speed or volume, there would be traffic calming.
It met that criteria.
Okay.
And I would say, that's part of our recommendation on this project is to look at traffic calming through this segment here to Harper, or to Haskell, all the way to O'Connell, where it is a collector street, where we do project some increase in traffic due to the connection. So I think that's going to be something that it's important to look at with the design of the project.
So just make sure I heard that right. You're from Haskell all the way to O'Connell.
Correct.
It could be considered for traffic calming.
Correct.
Okay.
I think on the slide I said Harper, but I meant O'Connell.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Is there a reason you stop at Haskell?
Well, I think at this time that would be my recommendation based off the traffic projections, and that I think it would be better to wait and see if it was needed west of Haskell in the future. I would hate to do something to put a bunch of traffic calming in now, not have that additional traffic, and to cause traffic to use other routes. And I think it would be better to wait after, or get traffic counts after the project's done, to see if we could always go back and add traffic calming on streets. And when we review and revise our traffic calming policy, that too would be a good time to look at, do we want to consider adding traffic calming to minor arterials? I think, again, we got to think of the whole transportation system in the network, and where do we want traffic? When I first started here, one of the first projects I worked on was putting a diverter at 18th and Main so that traffic was diverted to 19th Street. So we pushed it to 19th Street because it was cutting through the side streets to get to KU, to campus. So, we got to be careful about putting a bunch of traffic calming on 19th Street that will divert it to other streets. So I think we need to be a little cautious before we just go forward with a recommendation to do it throughout the whole corridor. Because, I understand there's a lot of traffic on 19th Street. We get the high school, and that's been there for a long time. That traffic has been there for a long time. I think this particular issue is to see, what we're saying is, does this connection increase traffic or cut through traffic on 19th Street versus what it is today? Today, as someone mentioned, you can use Harper, Haskell from 23rd to get to 19th Street. And so, again, we're just kind of looking at the impacts of this connection to Venture Park and how that impacts the corridor.
I can take a break, or I can keep going. But I want to keep going without you guys kind of giving me a yes. All right.
Keep going.
So, I'm maybe just a little thick on the traffic impact study, so bear with me on this one. That was completed in 2012, and as I recall from the previous times we've heard about this, there was no impact study based on the idea of opening up 19th Street to O'Connell. Am I misunderstanding that? Like, the study didn't take that into consideration?
On the impacts,
Right.
it did take into consideration.
The 2012 study did not consider if that road were opened.
It did. It used the traffic projection. What we do is we do trip generation for the site, for any site plan or project, and then look at what our expected distribution is. So for that project, we assumed 30% 19th Street, 70% 23rd Street. And then the purpose of the study is to look at intersection improvements. And so it did look at, the connection is there, our intersection improvements needed at 19th and Harper, 23rd and O'Connell. So from that aspect it was, but it didn't address
The distribution that you expected from the trips that would be generated from the site. That distribution network, if you will, did not assume that 19th and O'Connell would ever be connected. Am I remembering that correctly, or am I?
It did assume it would be connected, and I believe
did.
that the 50% scenario was when it assumed that it would be connected.
Okay.
And so it did not project, okay, it's 100% built out. What if we don't make that projection, that connection at 19th and O'Connell? What happens to 23rd and Harper or the other streets if at 100% connection's not made? So the traffic study didn't look at that, but if I remember correctly, at the 50%, it assumed that connection was open at
Okay.
19th and O'Connell.
I might just recollect that incorrectly from the last time. And then, so it's 3,800 roughly trips that would be generated? 38, and is that, am I remember, isn't that right?
Yeah, that was the number in the study.
And then 30% of that would be down 19th Street.
It was 30% of the total traffic generation, which was close to 13,000. So that 30% was the 3880 would use 19th Street.
Okay. And then, Jessica, your work suggests about 1,000 would go between O'Connell and Harper.
I don't know what your full build-out year was. Do you know what the full build-out is? See, because mine goes to 2040, which might not be full build-out.
Okay. So full build-out.
But ours really is looking at not that site's impacts of being built necessarily, but the entire community and how it travels to make trips on the network. There are different purposes.
So your analysis doesn't assume that there would even be a site, or it does assume that?
Well, no, it has employment projections at the site. I just don't know if they're the exact same as what they're planning at build out.
All right.
Because 2040 might not be when their build out is.
Just trying to get a more simple version of what your analysis is telling us. And it sounds like I'm hearing two things, and so that's where I'm confused. The analysis, Jessica, you did said there might be 1,000 new trips if that intersection is opened up, O'Connell
In
and
the
19th.
difference of opening it versus not opening it. So
Right.
that's just if you open it. That's not the difference in trips between now and 2040. Because there will be an increase in trips regardless of, along 19th Street, regardless of if you open that
Sure.
connection. The projection is there will be 1,000 difference in the
it's
section
open.
between the closest section that are related to just opening that roadway section.
A lot of that, just so I can clarify, because a lot of that is based on just population increase.
It's based on population, but it's also based on those traffic analysis zones also have retail and non-retail employment. So retail employment has a higher trip generation rate than non-retail employment because it's attracting users for the retail purpose too, and it factors that into the trip generation.
Okay.
So East Hills, Venture Park, those are not generally, most of the job projection that's there is non-retail. So you're talking about employees commuting as opposed to employees commuting, but also a retail attraction to that zone, which is a higher trip generation.
Retail is,
Yeah.
right. So 3,800, that number is the number you're projecting would use 19th Street, that if the site is built out to 100% or 50%?
It was the assumption at 100%.
All right. And so it seems like on one hand, it could be 3,800 new trips on that street. Maybe 1,000 on that segment of the street. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you connect it, that's how the trips are happening. These studies they're both
best practices for
Sure.
different types of transportation planning. One is very site-specific, keyed into build out and impacts of a site, because generally it's required when we do land development, depending on the scale of the development, a traffic impact study is required to be put together by the developers. It's supposed to help assume and make the responsibility of the burden of that development in terms of the trip generation, right? If it's going to impact the street network, to make those improvements tied to that site where those improvements happen with the site. So you don't get in a place where you're proactively making improvements that are going to be based on the impact of that site. So that's the traffic impact study that David is talking about, was done based on the assumptions about what's going to happen at Venture Park at that point in time when the land conversation is happening. This other model is more a long-range plan to look at what's the impact of all the different population increase, the existing capacity of the roads with the existing job, to see how trip making happens over a network that has a hierarchy to it.
What I'm trying to come up with is a sense of what is the appropriate amount of traffic on the street, given that it's a collector, that it has a lot of driveways. It goes through residential area, so that it doesn't seem like we have a sense of what that target is. And Jessica's model presents maybe some approximation of that with the color coding, where it hits a certain level of service that kind of downgrades it. I think that level of service is oriented to the person that's driving, not the neighborhood that has to live there.
Right,
So
it's about delay, yes.
So I'm kind of curious, what's the way to frame it more broadly so that it's really considering the neighborhood impact, not just the person that's driving through the neighborhood impact? And is there any way to know that, given, the nature of that particular segment of the road? Like I know what I've been on there to try to pull out of someone's driveway is pretty challenging now. So adding another 1,000 or 3,800 trips on there, I don't quite understand how that would, it just seems like it's pretty big impact. And that's just being a driver. And then there's, the walking and biking stuff. So is there an ideal cap to the amount of traffic that will be on that street is what I'm trying to figure out. Is there any way to sense that? And, have we failed the neighborhood in the way you might think of level of service has been degraded for the people that drive through the neighborhood? Is there any equivalent to that? Like a color coding for this neighborhood actually has too much traffic. Does that make sense? What I'm asking for? I'm not sure if it's possible, but it seems like that's what's in play, is we have a lot of data around traffic and the impact it has on people that want to drive, but we're not able to have any similar analysis of the livability of the neighborhood and how the adding in this many cars is going to change that livability. Does it go from livability, level of service to, from A to Z, or what is the impact?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a way to measure that. And I mean, the trips that are on 19th Street now, I mean, some of it's a question of where are they all coming from. I mean, obviously there's some coming from the neighborhood in the side streets, and that's what the collector or minor arterial streets are designated to do, is to funnel the trips from the neighborhood to those streets to get to the major arterial streets. So it's a question of, what's the number of trips, where they're coming from, and some of that information. There's so many different variables and factors that it's hard to say that, once the street gets to X amount of traffic, we need to find a way to shut it off, or is that capacity?
Well, I'm thinking 23rd Street obviously has greater capacity now that K10 has changed. So it seems really important to try to keep as many people as possible on 23rd Street. And yet here, we have fire department telling us that they'd rather avoid 23rd Street too. So, if you just thought about how far it is, maybe it seems more logical just to take 23rd, but not when you factor in congestion. So it seems like we've got to make something more painful. If 19th Street is to be regarded in a different way because it's a neighborhood and the city has a strategic priority around making our neighborhoods safe and livable, then 23rd Street's not a neighborhood. And so it does seem like understanding the impact we're having on the neighborhood versus the, more of the arterial corridor seems really critical to me. And I can't figure out from the analysis you presented, like, at what point have we kind of overwhelmed the neighborhood with traffic? And that, what's a comparable part of our city that has a collector street with as many driveways, and as much of a population? Or is this kind of a unique predicament that this neighborhood, or these neighborhoods are in? Is there any other, like, I'm thinking of Trail Road. Trail Road has a series of traffic calming devices that were installed. And if you used to use that road to get by, 6th Street, you're probably pretty angry now. And then now you're having to go to 6th Street because it might actually be less painful, if you will, than hitting all those, speed humps that are installed on Trail. So that seemed like a deliberate effort to try to get people off the street unless they actually belong there. And I don't see anything that shows us even the cut-through traffic that happens in this neighborhood, but I assume that's the biggest fear, is that people are going to bypass 23rd Street, like the fire department wants to. I don't mean that in any way that you're not, I'm just, acknowledging, like, there's something wrong with 23rd Street if you're trying to take a residential street to get through. That's an arterial. Arterials are designed to be the efficient way to move traffic. So that's not quite a question, I guess. I guess my question is really, what's the capacity of a neighborhood to absorb what should be directed to an arterial street? And is there any way we would know that we've exceeded this neighborhood's capacity?
Shirley, I think this is part of the conversation that the T2040 steering committee had, and part of the conversation we had around creating the major thoroughfares map, because the idea behind that map is to create a network that has a hierarchy of streets throughout our community. It also recognized in that process, and part of the discussion there was that downgrading 19th Street from Haskell to the east would allow this street, when it's being developed, to address some of the neighborhood concerns, to provide opportunities for there to be design considerations that address traffic calming. When you calm a street, you not only slow the speed down, but you make it a less attractive route to use as a cut through or a quick option. It's the same way that the model handles volume and that delay function, right? Because you can't travel as fast because it's calmed, but it also makes it a more pleasant, livable environment for you. You can hear David talk about that when he talks about wider bike lanes, right? So the street is wider, but you're providing amenity that improves quality of life for someone who chooses to bicycle. Or the idea that you have a pedestrian sidewalk, but now we're also talking about in the design, exploring how that center turn lane not only improves safety for people wanting to left turn, but also now allows us in other places to put in a grass median, which makes each lane option on the side not just be two lanes next to each other, right, where the road seems wider when there aren't other people traveling on it, but now a road with a bike lane when there isn't a center turn lane there for safety. Or it allows those mid-block crossing options. I think staff has tried to be responsive in the sense that we've recognized that neighborhood livability and quality of life and multimodal transportation are all visionary elements of our long-range plan, and how we get there is through design. And so this design scope is with the hope to identify how those things can address and hopefully alleviate the concerns of the neighborhood about cut-through traffic.
I guess I'm still not, maybe there isn't an answer, really.
I don't
It's just
know
really,
of a best practice that
the way that you're
quantifies livability.
Well, the analysis seems really to get to, have we degraded the quality of, traffic flow? And that, I don't think that's our question.
Yeah.
Is it degrading the quality of life in the neighborhood? Is a question I think everyone has on their mind, and that there's not any evidence to say that you haven't done that. So
I haven't seen a transportation best practice that quantifies livability in a way that's meaningful to a traffic impact study. So that would be something we should explore if it exists, but I don't know. These are the conversations we have, I think, in talking about how design can do that, but I don't know. And we use design as a tool to do that, but there's not a quantifiable process in the beginning where we can start to say, this street or speed or volume is too high as intended for the use.
Well, it seems that neighborhoods that have come here tonight, for the most part, think that traffic's already too high. So if we know it's going to be increasing, and system-wide it's increasing 143%.
And the question then would be to ask is, and we don't know, there's the capability to do this, but not to know this is, are they the traffic? Because how many of them drive on 19th Street? And so part of that is the discussion about what's cut through traffic versus what's traffic from that neighborhood. Like David had said, we've intentionally taken the opportunity to address neighborhood concerns through traffic calming at a bunch of other points throughout those neighborhoods that's funnel traffic to 19th Street. So we've intentionally done that in the sense that it's a higher classification of street. We've moved traffic there. And if we intend to do that to keep it off of residential streets where there's parking and only residential land uses, then that's the way the network has to function. There's not another alternative unless you literally decide, you're gonna require, you make the automobile less attractive. So you use design to make a street more comfortable to other users, and recognize that the Complete Streets policy is not about just multimodal, it's about automobiles too. So I would argue that not connecting 19th Street doesn't make it a complete street, because the Complete Streets policy says automobiles also. It's about all users and finding a way that they, in design, can all operate safely and efficiently on a street.
So, I mean, not even really trying to address the idea of whether the intersection is open or not. It's whether it's open or not. The amount of traffic, it seems like, your map implies that green is good, and I'm actually wondering if red might be more appropriate for 19th Street.
Charlie, I was looking at our traffic counts, just let me throw in. Good example might be 9th by Lawrence Avenue, 7,000 vehicles a day back in 2010. That's a very residential street, collector street in the city. So I just wanted to throw that out as an example as we're talking. I was trying to find one. 9th, this count was just east of Lawrence Avenue, so just down the hill from that school. Right there. So I just want to throw that out for context.
And so what's the count then?
Where were you, 5,000 something in the latest counts?
Yeah.
And this was
Scenario A
7,000
was
in
60,
2010.
60.
I don't have the 16 counts in here.
I mean, just from, my use, I was just picking up someone on 9th Street recently.
Okay.
And
so I just wanted to throw it out as a...
Trying to get in her driveway was about impossible. And get out of it was even twice as impossible. So I think that helps us to understand, how does this neighborhood experience traffic differently than other parts of the community? And it really is helpful to know that. So I think, as we're continuing the life of this new commission, helping us to understand, this neighborhood is experiencing this neighborhood experiences that, helps a lot. And I think those are 9th Street right there is a good example. Maybe they're suffering worse. Still gets to the question of,
but at some point we have to put the cars somewhere.
Yeah, on 6th Street, or we don't put the car anywhere.
Yeah.
Just don't buy one. So that question of where do we want to shift people, it seems like the goal is to get it all green, and I'm actually kind of questioning that. If green is good for the car, is that good for the neighborhood? If those neighborhoods that we know have too much traffic, and it's not the internal, local demand traffic, then how do you deliberately design the transportation system so that people that shouldn't use the street to get to their homes aren't using it?
But the reality is, Charlie, that if 23rd Street gets worse, people are going to go up Harper. People are going to go up Haskell. Those connections already exist, and they exist for a reason. You don't want to connect one way in. If there's a major accident or a water main break or anything on 23rd, where are people going to go to get through the city? I think there's a reason the network's built. And that network already exists there, and this is one point on it. So, I think that's a lot of the point that was made, is that why the traffic decreases as you go that way, because those connections already exist to that street.
Sure, and I'm not really debating about the network design. I'm talking about whether your intention is to try to keep fewer cars there. And that, it's really the implication that on that, those two pictures there, that red is something we want to avoid. And I think, maybe it's counterintuitive, but if the neighborhood is overwhelmed with traffic because we've made it so easy, because we're trying to keep everything green, it may be a bad policy.
Yeah, but if you look at the scenario map, go to the next slide. Look at 19th Street. It's the same in the color scheme in terms of capacity, whether you open it or not.
Right, maybe it should be red. So that, if your goal is to try to reduce the volume there, and you can make that red and the rest of it stays green, and that seems like you might have achieved the goal.
But those
of that
roads have
neighborhood.
excess capacity already in terms of when you're looking at their only yellow level of service for the most part of the roads that you're saying increased traffic. You want them red, increased traffic, but don't do projects. Well, I mean, that's not your goal either. I think what you're trying to say is there needs to be something in addition to this that considers how the street functions and what people's experience is with it besides delay. But you can't, I don't know how you do that in this modeling process.
Well, I guess feels like there's a lot less, there's a lot that's missing from the analysis, and you just naturally, intuitively go to, well, it should all be green because that must be the right thing. And I'm not sure that is the right thing.
We're not going to make it all green. I mean, scenario A is our region in 2040 with the projects that we plan to do. There's no way that you can make the entire network green. I mean, the idea is not to build capacity everywhere. The idea is to make it function more efficiently, to address hotspots that are going to cause problems in your community, for whether that be safety or other economic, issues, and at the same time recognize that there is, and in the plan calls for this, although our model is not a mode choice model, is to look at how you can take trips out of a single occupant car to make transit, bike, and ped more attractive.
Can I say something about the whole complete streets thing here? I wasn't sure I wanted to bring this up tonight because I was actually pushed out of the bike lane on 15th Street today by a car. I'm not sure if it was intentional or not, but the bike lanes in this town are pretty narrow and they're pretty frightening. You have to just go as fast as you can to get to the trail as quickly as possible. But I was driving down 19th Street a couple weeks ago, and I actually took a couple of photographs because it wasn't busy. I was stopped at a light, and there were trucks and cars who were driving in the bike lane, as they were going down the street. And that's because 19th Street is pretty narrow. And it looks like the plan is to increase the width when you do the improvements east of Harper, but doing that doesn't do anything for the safety of the street west of Harper. This was between Mass and Harper, I think. One of my favorite streets to ride a bicycle on in terms of complete streets is Princeton, because I think it was built to be that way. It has the median, it has just 2 lanes, it has turn lanes, it has nice bike lanes, well marked, and then it has parking, so it's got everything that's really, really safe. But I don't think that if you make it safe for whatever that segment is, and then don't do anything to make it safe in the rest of it, that gives cyclists any kind of safety for getting anywhere on that street. It's just safe for that one area. And so I guess what I'm saying is if you're increasing the car traffic, but you're not really doing, just painting bike lanes does not make it a complete street. You might as well, if you want to make it a safe street and you're increasing traffic, you might as well do away with bike lanes and find another route for cyclists. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. If you're increasing the car traffic, then you've just changed the character of that neighborhood, and it's no longer a pedestrian bicycle kind of route. It's now a car route.
That is basically what I'm saying, is how do you get beyond just this traffic only analysis and get to what matters in that corridor? And there's got to be some thought to what's the kind of inherent demand because of the design of the neighborhood that compels people to have to drive in and out of it. And those areas of town where there's a sort of a, thinking about the safety analysis that you did with the intersections, if we can see that it exceeds what's expected, then that is a hotspot. And so it feels like this is leading us to potentially having a hotspot without, we should be able to detect that ahead of time. Intuitively, I think we all kind of see it. But how do we say, oh, this is we need to have intensive efforts to design this street so that it doesn't become a magnet. Maybe it's not 30% of cars take 19th. We want all, except for emergency need. There's no need for more, also the fire department have to deal with congestion on 19th Street. If 30% more traffic makes it more congested. So, how does that street become reserved for people that live there and get people to, find it too painful to use, except for fire department, police department, people that really need it. For them, we want it to be all green. So, but the rest of those people that don't need to be there, my experience, if I don't live around there, should be, this is red and I don't like it, and I need to get over to 23rd Street. And I don't know how to get that through, but, is this an opportunity with the major project in front of us to say, here's how we should design this so that it doesn't become just the same old stuff we've done. I like the example of Princeton, because if you've been around, there are certain streets that are really nice to ride on. And Princeton is one of those. Lawrence, if it wasn't for the elevation change on Lawrence, I'd say that's another one. And if you could get that, okay, that's the kind of street we're shooting for. It doesn't invite a lot of cut-through traffic. Maybe Princeton does a little bit, but, that would be a useful, I think, for us.
So what in the scope of the design would you change to have that you think is not being addressed to do that?
I think we need to think about 19th Street in its entirety and not just this one section. Because we changed the corner of 19th and Iowa with the KU, that corner, I can't remember what it's called. We're going to put that underpass underneath Iowa, and so that says that we're going to be encouraging pedestrians and cyclists and hopefully getting KU students from there to maybe the downtown area. And so, we can't do one thing at one end of the street and another thing at the other end of the street, and without, we can, but then we're going, it just doesn't seem like a very clear vision. And I know the city has been looking at this for a long time, but I think it may be time to relook at what we're trying to accomplish with the whole street, the entire length of 19th, or this neighborhood, or whatever we're trying to do.
I have some comments kind of related, maybe to take a little break here.
Thanks, Steve. You've been really patient tonight.
Yeah. But I don't have any questions, but I just have, you asked for feedback, and I think I'm more focused. I do appreciate the discussion about the bigger picture and, some of the stuff that Charlie and Catherine have talked about. It comes up pretty regularly, but I did, before this morning, admittedly, I thought I was a pretty decent numbers guy, but until I started listening to Jessica a couple months ago, I'm like, boy, I've got a long way to go. But I must admit, after today, I did understand it quite a bit better. I think I really appreciate, just a little more insight and kind of bullets about what you did. And before this morning, I was trying to get my arms kind of around what my instincts might say, as opposed to data. And I know I don't deserve to be in the room with Jessica and Dietrich when it comes to data. This may seem, a little bit, I'm not sure what to say, but what I did was I looked at the city of Lawrence and zones in the city of Lawrence. And I just kind of started in North Lawrence and proceeded to the south, and then I got over to Pinckney and went to the south to the SLT and kept going west in the city. And then I included areas west Topeka areas west, Ottawa areas south, Eudora areas east, and then areas north of North Lawrence. And I came up with 17 areas. And admittedly, this is really simple kind of, what would Steve do? There's, you know, that's really what I'm asking myself. If I was living in any of these areas and I had to go to Venture Park, whether to work or just to get to that part of town, what would I do? And if anybody's interested in this, I'd be happy to show it. But out of the 17 areas, I looked at how you'd get there now with the block. No, that's okay. It's I looked at getting to Venture Park now and getting to Venture Park with 19th Street being open. And 10 out of the 17 areas would divert to 19th Street. Whereas it might have taken Haskell to 23rd, now they're at Haskell and they can go on 19th. And I really think at the end of the day, it's more dependent on Venture Park developing and the type of uses that are going to go into Venture Park. If you've got a bunch of warehouses, you know, that don't have a manufacturing component and, you know, things that would generate a large population out there, in my mind, that's much different in terms of whatever would happen on 19th Street. And we don't know the answer to that. All we know is the city's invested a lot of money out there and they need to develop it. You know, they need to market Venture Park. But my notes after looking at this little analysis, and I'll, you know, we can put it in the notes and everything. 10 out of 17 areas may divert to 19th. I think traffic will increase on 19th if it's open, some between Iowa and Haskell, but mostly east of Haskell. My 2 cents. That's what my instincts tell me. People working in the east part of Venture Park may choose 23rd over 19th, even if 19th is more direct. I think some people are going to say, gee, I can get to 23rd, and, you know, particularly if you're going to the East Hills, to the East Hills Parkway or Drive, you may want to get over to 23rd Street and zip up there and then come in. So without looking at that in a lot of detail, I think there's some fluidity to that. People working in the west part of Venture Park, I think would be very inconvenienced to go to 23rd and then backtrack to, on O'Connell, back to the north part of Venture Park. That just seems like I'd be, you know, I'd be frustrated if I had to go clear up to 23rd. And I know I say clear up to 23rd, it is just 4 blocks, you know, and that's not a huge deal, but it may be perceived like that if you're late to work and you're trying to get to work back there. A temporary barricade, I was thinking, I live in the University Place neighborhood and we experience a lot of issues on game days, you know, both at Memorial Stadium and at Allen Fieldhouse. If O'Connell was open, I don't know why you couldn't just block it for a game day and just tell the people from Kansas City, hey, you can't come through here, sorry. And honestly, I think a lot of the traffic from Kansas City, if they were smart, depending on where they parked for Allen Fieldhouse, would take K10 all the way to Iowa Street and come in back there and park, you know, coming from Iowa Street in and just skip the whole town. How you get people educated, I don't know.
Better signage that tells you Lawrence is this.
Maybe, yeah. And for people in Lawrence, just in general, going to Kansas City, I've learned that the path of least resistance from 18th and Mississippi is Louisiana to 31st to Haskell, and I jump on K10. I don't take 19th Street anymore or 23rd Street to go to Kansas City. I think the path of least resistance and fewer traffic signals gets me out there quicker. So that's my little non-analytical deal. Now, just in general, and this will just take a couple of minutes, I do agree with Charlie and others that it seems when we look at projects in Lawrence, our first thought is, what are the cars going to do? And that just seems to drive so much that we do and think about, and it just seems like, golly, I know we're doing a really good job with bikes and peds, but it's just kind of a mindset for me. And I know that this is arguable. I know Jessica and I would have a nice little debate about this, but I just think that the mentality in Lawrence, looking in the future, is automobiles, much more than bikes and peds. That's my 2 cents. I would offer this about O'Connell, the O'Connell connection. Obviously, the city's made considerable investments in Venture Park and will need the ability to market businesses moving into the area. I think what the chamber presented tonight didn't really move me one way or another. What would have been interesting to know is for the people that now work in Venture or in East Hills, where are they coming from and how are they getting there? And what comments may they have, as opposed to businesses just kind of standing up and saying, hey, I think we ought to open it up. I don't really give a lot of, merit to that personally. I think this part of 19th needs to be improved. 47 feet seems excessive to me. I was out there this morning, and if you look across the barricade, you see how wide O'Connell is. And it just seems like a thoroughfare. And, to continue that to Harper, to me, just seems real excessive. I'm more in the park with reducing the width of that street, doing something a whole lot more sustainable in terms of stormwater, and really looking at it from a different angle. The transponder suggestion seems reasonable, but not without problems. I think I'll go with the fire department and the police department on that. That affects them to a great extent. Lastly, I wouldn't open it up now. I wouldn't open up that connection until I knew more about what was going in Venture Park and how necessary it was to make that connection. At this moment, it seems like a moot point, and I know the city's marketing real hard. I don't know, there's maybe things on the horizon. I'm not aware of what they are, but it seems like a $3.5 million investment for that small area seems excessive to me. And not that we have a checkbook, but we could probably use that money in other places, maybe along 19th Street around the schools. Last thing, I'd sure like to hear more from the school district. The community comes in here, a lot of people talk about the school district. We know what goes on around those schools, anybody does. And I'm not sure what the correct position for the school district would be, or maybe it's, maybe they don't normally chime in with things like this, but I'd be real interested to know more if Ron can offer any of that from the school district's perspective. Thanks.
Well, I can go ahead and address that if you'd like. I'll start by saying that nobody said we need to shut it down or we need, don't open it or keep it closed. I wasn't given anything from there, but we did get feedback to school board members, superintendent, and so I've had a discussion with some people about the ramifications of the project. Our largest concern is if there is going to be an increase in traffic, then we do need to take into consideration, obviously, the safety of our students, pedestrian, bicycle, along with driving. We do have, I believe, Kennedy, again, I don't have the map in my head. I know we do have a crossing guard at 19th and Massachusetts for the Cordley area. We do have a crossing guard at Kennedy, but I think due in part to where the traffic was, I think we actually moved them up a little bit further up Harper than not right at 19th Street. So our largest concern would be just making sure that, I know we have very specific, qualifications for what deems a crossing guard or what deems a beacon or, those kinds of things. And so we would want to be vigilant that if there were improvements and there were increases in traffic, that we would definitely want to make sure that that was taken into consideration, obviously. I have not had a conversation with the bus company per se, specifically to ask them if there was anything with their concerns, but I can certainly get that information. Does that answer? Is there any specific question or concerns?
Well, I just have one, I think, and that would be, have there been accidents with any of the kids or along that corridor?
Right. As far as pedestrian or bicycle, I don't know that we've had any accidents there. Speaking to LHS, I'm sure we have a lot of accidents in the parking lots that I get to pull video for quite a bit. But, one of the things I will say at Lawrence High, in part of when we did the remodeling, and Lawrence High is getting ready to do major remodeling, and so I'm sure there's also going to be some traffic flow improvements made there. But I do know that we did internally first thing we did was we built a student lot off of 21st Street. When we several years ago, when we were doing the changes with the fields and everything, we put in a student lot off 21st Street. So we've intentionally, and there used to be a way to drive between the major buildings. That's shut down now. So all of that traffic, the students' only choices to get out are either onto 21st Street, or they could weave their way in and turn on to Louisiana. But so for the bulk of that traffic is coming out of there. Now, the pickup traffic and the staff parking lot is what faces 19th Street. We put in no left turn. And it's not even on a time. It's just no left turn out of the what I would call the main. We put a one-way flow through so that you come in off of 19th Street, you pull around the front of the building, you pick up your student, and the only access you have is that the exit closest to Louisiana, and that's a right turn only. It is very difficult to get in and out of there during 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after. Well, I'm not going to say 30 minutes after, but that 15, 20 minutes before and after school hours. But that's part of what we tried to do to keep from congesting and backing everything up. Now, there is another entrance and exit further to the west, closer to the field, and that, I believe, is open to left or right turns. But, as far as, we've had few actual pedestrian or bicycle accidents, and the ones that have occurred have not been really close to our schools. They've been in neighborhoods.
Can you talk about any crashes and stuff along 19th Street?
I don't have any crash data with me.
I'm looking at the map right now. Head-bike crashes specifically, I don't see any until there's one on the corner of Haskell. And there's one, looks like it's on Delaware, just south of 19th. And then as you get towards Mass, there's one, two here and there.
I guess I'm a bit disappointed that nobody from North Lawrence was here, because basically if people from North Lawrence want to work at Venture Park or East Lake, you're basically saying, sorry, you live in North Lawrence, but you need to go all the way to 23rd. And as far as Steve's comment about actually talking to a person, my husband does work at East Lake, and he takes 23rd Street, and he wouldn't take 19th Street because we live off 22nd. So we would never take 19th.
That's what my analysis would have said.
Yeah.
And I would.
So not everybody that works at East Lake or Venture Park is going to use 19th Street.
I was just wanted to also add, I'm sorry, Steve, that I live on west side of town, and, you know, there was a time when I wanted to go to Kansas City or Access, I would weave my way through. I pretty quickly got away from 19th Street. I mean, I'm more of a 11th or 13th and up, but since the SLT has opened up, I find another way to get around and just circumvent the city.
So, our action item on this is provide feedback on East 19th Street, Harper to O'Connell design scope. So, I guess I saw it as we're being asked to provide feedback on the design scope, not so much whether it goes through or not. I mean, it's a connection on our thoroughfares map. However, in the broader picture, it was mentioned that the complete street policy is not just for bikes, buses, and pedestrians. It also is for cars. However, 99, I want to say 0.9% of our streets prioritize automobiles over anything, over everything. I would like to know one street in Lawrence where automobiles are not the first priority. One street.
Well, it wouldn't be streets. It would be
Multimodal
multi-use
paths.
trails, bike ped undercrossings.
Right.
But the primary function of street, I mean, that historically and
We are
conventionally.
ready, though, to start looking at some bike boulevards potentially, which try to push more of that too. You know, and those will be selected based on where we've been trying to push traffic and what's the classification. We're not going to take a collector or arterial street and make it a bike boulevard. That's not the intent of that classification of a street. So we are trying to move towards that and focus more on that, but those will be placed in, I guess, appropriately placed based on the volumes and speeds, and, you know, obviously we have a plan. We're trying to follow that too. So we're trying.
Yeah,
But still,
I
it's
think
street
you're
to
doing a
street.
fairly good job. Like, I've looked at the things that plan on being done, and I was like, okay, this is good. So it's more of like a, you know, what I think that sometimes I imagine that we want to see in Lawrence feels so radical sometimes, even though it's not in other places. In other places, they're like, yeah, this is what we do. I mean, not very many places, but some other places. So it's really challenging. But, I mean, I do appreciate that things are happening, but I also look at that street, just where it connects, where you see it go from the dead end to what the connection is. And it feels big and wide and fast. It couldn't be for very long, because you would get to Harper. Yes, Harper. And that really couldn't continue because that road gets narrower. But the other question I have is, like, you know, the bike lanes. It just doesn't feel like it goes far enough if you're really trying to encourage or allow that mode of transportation. The 6-foot bike lane, like, could we have protected bike lanes instead of the turn lane? I mean, I guess it just doesn't seem like it goes far enough, but I don't have the answer for you. I think that's, I guess, where you guys come in. It just feels like, I suspect by, what's the name of that place? Tractor Supply Company. The road that goes by it, that's O'Connell, right? Is that O'Connell, or is that, I believe that's O'Connell.
Yes, it is.
Maybe it's this. I
It
don't
is
think it's
O'Connell that
It's
goes
O'Connell.
south, and then you turn east.
And
Tractor
it's got
Supply.
a turn lane. Nowhere to turn onto, but got a turn lane. Or not last I saw. And it's got bike lanes, right? I believe. And it just doesn't feel like a place you would want to bike. So it's like, I feel like it's just providing the bare minimum, I guess.
You want us to respond to that? Well, I guess I would say what we're,
Something. Okay, let's see.
we're trying to balance all of these modes
I know.
with the right of way.
I know.
So I would say one thing, our standard collector street with minimum width without bike lanes is 31 feet back to back. Our
So that's kind of what we have to build because that's our standard collector street.
without bike lanes.
Without
That's
bike
just the
lanes, yes.
minimum standard in development code.
So 31 feet, if
the-
you just built it with a lane
2
going
lanes of
each
traffic.
direction.
That would be
Okay.
similar to a street like, I'm trying to think of an example, Harvard, I
Mm-hmm.
believe. With bike lanes, it's 36 feet. That doesn't include, and there's no median. So that's a wide street without any median. And
Right.
so the difference between that minimum standard for a collector street, the 36 versus this design of 47 is having the raised median, having that raised median. So instead of having 36 foot of pavement, you have, it's broken up into segments. So,
Right.
I mean, I understand your point and the concern and the idea to keep pushing for multimodal transportation and safety and wide bike lanes, and, you know, it's a balance, because, you know, as Commissioner Schartz said, the section to the west feels very narrow and unsafe, but the counter argument is, what, do we make it wider when neighborhoods, they don't want to make the streets wider? And so that's the absolute minimum that we can have to have painted bike lanes. And so then it's the argument, well, if it's not safe, do you take the painted bike lanes away and just not have the bike lanes? I mean, so that's the counter argument to that. So that's the, you know, and we're looking at this section here, and I think that's, you know, that's why we ended up with the staff recommendation of 47 feet, because we feel it's a balance of providing safe transportation for vehicles and turn lanes, provide the bike lanes, and it has, the median has a calming effect to slow traffic, and to provide a median break for pedestrian crossing. That's how we arrived at it. We could do it any number of ways. We could do the minimum collector street at 31 feet and not do a whole lot of pavement and stripe 5-foot bike lanes and next to 10-foot travel lanes. We don't recommend to do that. I think this is going to be probably enhanced safety design for bike facilities on 19th Street, having that median, because we don't have that anywhere else to the west. So I think we understand all of the concerns, and again, we're limited with right-of-way as well. So, you know, we sometimes can't have it all, but.
Well, and I understand that, and when this came up originally, I started looking at, could you just keep it closed? And then I looked at the maps and thought, well, I mean, I've gone back and forth between like, yeah, that sounds feasible, or not during this meeting. But if you look at the maps and where the other places it's connected, it just seems like it wouldn't much matter.
Well, I think it's going to matter in the future when people work at Venture Park. I mean, right now, if you know, so if you
Well,
live,
I mean,
if you live
there
in
are
the
other
neighborhood-
connections off of 23rd Street that you can get there anyway.
But if you live in the
Get to
neighborhood off
19th.
19th Street, and say you work at Harper, so you can drive your car to Harper,
Mhm.
okay, you're fine with that. Well, you want to gate it at Haskell? I mean, where do you draw the line on what's local traffic, what's cut-through traffic? And that's that's the challenge with all this, and we understand the concerns, and that's why we went through and we had this scenario with the transportation plan to try to, and you know, it's all assumptions and scenarios and numbers. So, you know, I'm first one to say it's not going to happen. It may not happen that way. I mean, we're just trying to make an educated guess for planning purposes. But what we don't want to do is be 5 years down the road, have an industrial park that's full, and have traffic that they're still using 19th Street, but then they go down to Harper and they go south and they're going out of their way. It's less efficient. It's causing congestion at other intersections in town. We're pushing, there's a school on Harper Street. You know, we got to weigh all of those factors. And so, you know, this is, you know, again, this has been in the plan, and as we continue to grow as a community, we need to have options to serve the new areas. And we're all for safety and multimodal transportation and bike facilities. Believe me, we are. So, again, we don't feel in any scenario that a gate would be a good idea. It would be a set of precedent for a public street to have a gate to allow some people through and some not, and you know that. So
I generally think connections are a good thing, and that's sort of what's lacking in our western side, just because it gives options for everything, for everyone. I mean, it's just addressing the whole road aspect that, you know, has come up and I think is important to look at. But it's clear that we're trying as a community. It's just hard when you feel like it's, you know, incremental and not as, I don't know.
Dave, do you want to maybe just describe what this, in the process that David's drafted about the whole public meetings at 50% of design and receive feedback from you about the design plans? Do you want to describe like what they would see in this? Like what would that look like, what they will be able to respond to at that point in time?
well, I mean, it would basically be the plan view of the project. So the limits, the width of the road, where we think crossings would be, what intersection improvements we think would be needed. That's, you know, basically the first, you know, we put what we believe is recommended plan on paper, give us your feedback. So when we also start to get feedback about easements and right of way and pedestrian connections, and so you know, I think that for the scope of this project, for the connection and that whole discussion being made and the traffic impacts for this project, it's staff's opinion that the, you know, the additional traffic or impacts will be primarily east of Haskell. I completely understand the concerns with 19th Street, the corridor. I mean, those will exist with or without this project. That's a completely separate issue or study or corridor study. And, you know, I don't know, I can't say if there's anything we can do to alleviate that, because there are so many different destinations along 19th Street with schools that are generating that traffic. So again, I guess we understand some of the concerns and questions, but we're trying to move forward, because if we continue to discuss this around and around year after year after year, we really don't get anywhere. So, you know, that I think the plan that we've laid out is just an idea. I think the bigger issue, it sounds like, is the connection or not. I mean, some of it's probably the design details, but most of the comments that we've had is fix the street, provide bike connections, sidewalk connections, but don't make the vehicle connection. I think that's a decision and a conversation for the city commission to ultimately decide if that's good for the whole community or not. So, you know, I don't know if there's anything else to add from the planning side, but you know, I think some of the design details, you know, we can present options with this schedule, 50% through design, get feedback if we do proceed with the project.
Could I comment on that? I made this comment a couple of times. I think recently, did we see the 23rd from Louisiana to Mass, 50% last month?
Yes.
Okay. My opinion is, if we're going to make any significant change to the design, it's now. It's not at 50%. Being in the profession, you get 50%, you're hardlining, you're looking at details, you're doing, you're moving this thing further along. And I tend to think that that's almost too late. Correct me if engineering practices may be different than what I'm used to, but I do think that that if this body is going to make a difference, or the city commission is going to make any difference, it's now. I think it's almost too late if you get beyond the concept. I think the big question is the connection or not, but I do think there's another issue about the width of the street and the stormwater and the cost of, kind of the traditional solution that's being looked at now, that at the end of the day, for my 2 cents, I would do something that had a smaller impact on the environment and would cost less and still take care of emergency and vehicles and bikes and people walking in that area. I just don't think at 50% it's feasible that we're going to have that much to say about it.
And I would say there's probably a limit on how much you have to say. I mean, we do have road design standards and development standards for the city on widths of streets for minimum, and we start making exceptions for a city street, and we have other development occur, and they don't want to put in any storm sewer or, and so you got to be careful. We got minimum standards for lane development and streets, and so, if we want to have a discussion, if the Transportation Commission wants to look at different options with the street layout, I think that's perfectly acceptable to make that recommendation to say, hey, we want to look at the 47-foot wide street, this 36-foot wide street, these different layouts and how it fits into that section of 19th Street. I think that's perfectly acceptable to provide that recommendation that we can bring back and very easily show you the different options that, we don't have to put in the turn lane. There's, this is, our recommendation is based off of, what minimum design standards and providing some other, I feel like some safety benefits with the center median. But we are certainly open to at that 50% design phase or even earlier of maybe a concept design phase to provide several different street cross-section options to get feedback on.
I think that would be a good idea, in general to do that. And I don't think we'd ever want to break any rules in terms of engineering standards and stuff like that. I mean, obviously you need to not allow that to happen. And when we do make suggestions, we certainly expect, that kind of feedback, whenever it comes up. But I just think to really be part of the process, and I know you guys have your hands full and we're here once a month for 2 hours. Or is it 5 hours?
It's not 2 hours.
Yeah. But nonetheless, we're an advisory board and it's not a full-time thing for us. And, we're kind of getting our feet here. But I personally think that if we're really going to have an impact, it needs to happen a little earlier in the game.
So a couple quick questions. You said 31 feet is the minimum for a collector. So what is that? 2 11-foot lanes?
Well, I mean, if it has parking, I mean, some collector streets will have parking, so the assumption is it's 2 through lanes with parking.
Okay.
And I'm don't want to be wrong, but I believe like a street like Harvard is 31 feet.
And that's curb to curb, right?
Curb to curb, back of curb to back of curb. You can, there's parking that's allowed on one side, and you can have two-way traffic.
So what's this, you said with bike lanes, it's 36?
Correct.
So that's 5 feet for bike lanes, or is that because that's sort of allotted differently? If there are bike lanes on it, there's less parking? What's the?
would not allow parking. It would be 2 through lanes and then bike lanes.
2 5-foot bike lanes?
It would be 5 foot from the edge of the traveled lane to the toe of the curb. If you include the gutter pane of the curb, it's a little wider.
Is, on what you proposed with
Right to the
47 feet,
curb.
does that allow for parking?
No.
Okay, so if parking is not allowed on a standard collector, what's the width then? Is that still 36 feet, or is that now?
Well, the minimum is 31,
That's minimum with parking or no parking, or either way?
either way.
Okay.
I can't think of any, again, offhand, that we don't allow parking on either side, and it's a collector street. There may be some, but that's the minimum width.
Well, I thought I heard you say the 47-foot would not allow parking. Is that?
It would not. So the assumption with the 47-foot is it's the 36-foot with a median, the 11-foot median.
So that would be a collector then without parking?
Correct.
So if that collector didn't have a center turn lane and still didn't have parking, what would that then be?
Well, the minimum is 36 feet.
Okay.
It's hard to see, look behind the chart, it might be a little easier. This shows 4-foot bike lanes after the gutter, which with the gutter,
Okay,
it's 5.5.
So it's 4.
And then it's 2 12-foot lanes. That's the 36-foot.
Yeah. And I
So the
would-
31 is just, the bike lanes go away, basically, and you have wider travel lanes to account for parking.
Well, Amanda, I think, as I've taken a look at Ninth Street, which you pointed us
What?
to.
Sorry.
I want to point out that it looks to me like Ninth Street has volume of traffic that's probably exceeding what your projections show for 19th Street. You said it's about 9,000?
I think it was 7,000 something. Well, that was 2010 numbers.
I mean, the number,
So it's a little
I'm on the
updated.
interactive map, and it shows about 9,000.
Yeah, it might have went, I was on our local, it only had up to 10.
And
2010.
the volume on 19th kind of looks like near Harper is 3,840 in 2017. And at the worst scenario, if I'm understanding the way you guys were looking at the traffic impact, that would double to maybe somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 total. So at that point, it would be a collector street that has less volume than Ninth Street. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, based on the assumptions.
So getting
that
to
you
this
made.
question I had about, are we doing something to this neighborhood that's suddenly like unique and, a significant change to something? It seems like it would really make it then more like Schwegler with, not Schwegler, Sunset Hill.
Sunset Hill.
Yeah. So that would be the equivalent experience of a neighborhood. The difference there is the road is only 22 feet wide. It's not, either 47 feet or 36 feet. It's a 22-foot wide road. There's no bike lane.
Where at?
9th Street.
Wouldn't it be 26?
It would be the minimum residential street, so 27 foot back to back. I don't know if we have any that are 22.
I'm doing kind of my high-level Google Maps measurement.
All
It
right.
says it's
I get
22
your-
feet.
I understand your
So I guess what I'm getting to is we have a street in our community that is already narrower than the minimum, and it has volume of traffic that's 3 times what's currently happening on 19th Street. If I'm understanding that correctly.
That's possible, if that's
So-
the volume.
So there's getting to this, how do we better understand the context of what we're thinking the neighborhood might experience? It's like they're going to turn themselves into Sunset Hill, but they're going to have a 47-foot roadway. And how does that impact their sense of livability?
But won't it also have some speed control too, or some traffic control devices?
Yeah, we're recommending to evaluate that.
Right, but, I
It
think
seems
I think the
wide,
width
but-
itself actually creates a different experience. I mean, if you've got on O'Connell, it's the 47-foot, it's exactly what they're proposing, if I understand right. It's the same road that O'Connell is. Now that extends through this neighborhood up until Harper, so it's not the whole corridor. Is that right? Or,
I mean, I don't know if any streets, apples to apples, the same. I mean, but based off of your assumption that's the collector street it's less width, whatever it is, 27 or whatever, and would have the same volume. I mean, I think that would be similar. That's the way you're trying to look at it.
So,
I'm not saying it's acceptable what Sunset Hill has to go through, but it helps me to understand, like, is this something we're creating a real, anomaly? Or is it we're basically saying, okay, your neighborhood's going to kind of go to the same experience somewhere else that's happening in Lawrence? That just helps me to situate it. That street doesn't seem to have bike lanes on it, on 9th Street right there, so. This road, if it's built, as kind of presented, it would be.
Is your concern that we're potentially creating a raceway?
No, it's more of just what's the
perception of
what's the, how significant is this change in a neighborhood? And so it's easier for me to situate myself in, where's a neighborhood that we could compare this to that I'm familiar with that is kind of like what we're imagining this future impact.
Gotcha.
And so I don't think there is one, but maybe that area of 9th Street, if you imagine that suddenly the road getting wider, that might be equivalent. Because it's actually got higher volume of traffic, it's got a school right there, so, as I would take that road, what would it feel like to suddenly have that road, twice as wide? Because that's what's happening here, is their road's going to go from 22 feet to 47 feet.
I would argue because Sunset Hill actually sits on 9th Street rather than not off of it like Kennedy does, that it would probably make life a lot easier in a lot of that area because people pull off to try to grab kids instead of going through the queue in the one-way area back through West.
Yeah, from the school perspective, like, if that's that
that's
wider.
what I say from my perspective. It would, interesting you bring this up because I now, I didn't used to, I've moved and I travel 9th Street quite a bit more, so I travel that area at least once a day, if not more often, whether I'm going to work or even to go, to come downtown. And, it obviously, some of it's the peak, it's not fun necessarily going through there. I'll avoid it like when school's out.
So, I wanted to hear what Jeff had to say, but then I want to ask about our action here.
I think one of the key things to remember about 9th Street that makes it a little bit different in the situation is that 9th Street has a large retail generator sitting at a major intersection that this is not occurring at. When you talk about retail and non-retail employment and the way that they generate in traffic modeling, the Merck area, the shopping center right there at the corner is going to generate a lot more traffic and a lot more patterning than what you would see out of an industrial complex or an industrial park, as in the case of Venture Park. The patterning is going to be a lot different on both the peak kind of movement periods and also the amount of traffic you're going to see going down those items there. Key to keep in mind with Venture Park is that it's zoned IM and IG, the two higher industrial districts that we have in the city of Lawrence. Retail generating trips would not be likely to occur based on the zoning district that park currently has. IG and IM do not allow retail uses by most rights. There's a very strict amount of retail uses that are possible. So to kind of keep that in the context of 9th Street versus this street is you really have a difference in that generation point at, forgive me, I don't remember the name of the shopping center, but where the Merck is at versus what we would see possibly with Venture Park based on its current zoning.
Right, I think.
But that might argue that we don't need a 47-foot wide street.
What I'm saying is we have a small street accommodates 3 times the volume of traffic going through a neighborhood. And the proposal here is, double the size of the road for traffic that won't even eclipse what people experience on 9th Street.
I just wanted to point out that there's a very distinct difference between the two roads that we're talking about and make that on the record
Sure.
that there's a difference there.
But there's no more travel width proposed for cars than that's on Ninth Street. And I think that you
Yeah, I
said,
know,
it's deceiving to say you're doubling the width, because that is for, most of that is likely gonna be median, that makes it more like Princeton. Now, granted, there's more traffic than Princeton, but that, the feel is gonna be very different than, you're not, what you see at the end of O'Connell is not what this road will be, you know, as you travel west, so.
That's kind of why I was asking about trees and other things, like you can make a really nice street that happens to also be wide, but it doesn't feel like a tarmac, and that's, you know, maybe the aspiration.
Yeah,
Getting back to
That's
the
our aspiration.
feedback on this is, how do you make a road that's got space for everybody?
So as
But it
far as,
doesn't make it feel like it's a hostile road.
as far as that goes, the median versus the middle turn lane, I imagine the middle turn lane isn't absolutely necessary because of what exists and maybe planned to go there in the future. Like you have the shelter there and you have the turnout to the mobile home park.
Brookwood?
And those are the two primary turns on that road, is that correct?
There's
And
several.
fairgrounds, but what is there's a salvage yard
Yep.
farther
There's
down.
several access points, but there may, I mean, some of them have multiple access points to 19th Street where we can consolidate them. So, you know, I think that we would still need to have, if we go with a median break where we need to allow the left turning traffic to get in, but that's would be part of the design scope to try to maximize the amount of green space and minimize the amount of pavement.
And I was going to say, and the new shelter actually has 2 driveways now instead of 1, so.
Maybe I'm trying to get to the end of the tunnel, but Dave, how would you summarize what you've heard tonight? Maybe Jessica, too?
I have a
Just-
question.
go ahead.
That might help
Okay.
that. So as far as what you need from us, an action, do you want bullet points saying, here's what we want you to do, or do you think what we've given you is good?
Well, I can attempt at going through some things that I've noted.
Okay.
One is reviewing this fairground site plan and how that ties in to the street segment. Looking at different cross-sections or widths of the street. That could be something I would, based on this feedback, add to this design, that we would provide that prior to the 50% concept or field check plans, what I call field check, but that'd be the 50%. Get feedback on school buses, where they're stopping. I think that's important as well. And anything else that you guys, that I'm missing on the scope of the project, as far as the things that we've listed on here?
Can I make a comment about a gate? My life is gates. So, you know, we've got the garages on campus that all have gates that take at least one full-time and sometimes two to maintain. We put the gate in on Sunflower, and there was a plan to put another gate on the other side, replace that booth with a gate, and I'm reluctant to do it because of the trouble that we have with the Sunflower gate. They are built to break away so that if a vehicle hits it, it doesn't torque the gate box. It just breaks cleanly. So an emergency vehicle could just drive through it. And I know we have a transponder there. And I think the buses have trouble. And I don't know if emergency vehicles have had trouble with them. But I just think that gates are problematic. If somebody hits it or somebody takes it, then it's open, and so the purpose of the gate is defeated. So I'm not sure what the answer is there. I think I live on a dead end area off of 27th and Osdale, and when 31st Street was closed, the traffic there was so bad that there were times we could not turn left out of Osdale to get onto 27th. And then the city did do traffic calming there, and it was like magic. Suddenly there was a raised sidewalk put in and a stop sign put in at one point, and the traffic, people just, it was granted towards the end of the 31st Street project, so it wasn't very long before 31st Street opened up, but it really changed behaviors and fewer people came down 27th. So I think, if I don't know if a gate is the answer, but I think if you don't do a gate, I think traffic calming could change behaviors, and people that don't need to go that way would choose to avoid the speed humps and those kinds of things.
When do you think this will go to the city commission, Dave? Is that, is this a budget decision for the commission, or?
Well, it's in the CIP for 2019, but it would be ultimately a decision for them to keep it in the budget for next year, because they're working on the 2019 budget. So I don't make their meeting agenda, so I can't tell you when, but it would be at the latest with the budget.
It will be discussed in the context of the budget.
I would imagine it would be, yes.
At some point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
But, yeah, but what we would like to do is get feedback. I mean, the reason we need to get feedback is if my job is to keep things moving that are in the plan. So if it's planned for 2019, we need to get started with design 2 months ago, because we're already behind schedule.
Right.
To get through design and bring concept plans back and utilities and there's so many factors. And so if we're going to continue to deliver the project next year on time, then I hope that we can get this to them and get some decision on proceeding relatively soon. But
I'd like to, I'm looking at your scope of design slide with the bullets. And one of the bullets is evaluate the location for mid-block raised crosswalk. I guess I'd like to see that as in plural. I mean, it seems like there might be a couple of places where that would be useful. And didn't know if there was already an intent to look at a particular area where the mid-block crossing. I mean, it is a long stretch of road, and I don't know if there's need for more than one mid-block crossing. But I'd be curious if that could be considered. The evaluate options for traffic calming devices from Haskell to Harper.
should be O'Connell.
Okay, just want to make sure that we got that. I'm also we've talked a lot about what happens at the curb with the radius. That's come up a lot this last year, and I'm wondering about, when you get to the intersections, what is how does the intersection get designed to support pedestrian activity over making it easier for people to drive around it? And I don't know, I don't feel like we've really gotten clear guidance on what's required versus just what's the policy. And, the NACTO design guidelines seem to have some other ideas about that, and I'm kind of curious if part of the design work could be to evaluate different curb extensions or whatever, maybe what's the intersection at Haskell or at Harper and 19th going to look like? Is that even part of it? That intersection? There's a roundabout mentioned here, so is it?
That would be part of what I would expect we would get feedback from at the midpoint of design, where those things are easily changed.
So I think that's what we're looking for now, is to
Those are things that we traditionally evaluate all of those things
Yep.
with the design process, but it is noted.
Regarding the fairground site plan, the site plan didn't have anything about a shared use path around the fairgrounds. It was in discussion about it, that there was interest at the county commission to do that. So this might be just an opportunity to check with the county about whether there's, you know, if they're thinking in the future they might want to install something else on the fairground property, then maybe that section or some portion of that area along their property would be more appropriate to have as a shared use path. So that's, if you look at the site plan itself, it wasn't there. So,
So I'm thinking that unless there's specific further feedback that you want, we need to wrap this meeting up.
well, are we asking, I mean, this seems like we're not asking for any consideration of anything other than a 47-foot back-to-back street. Is that,
No.
Well,
I'm just looking at the bullets, so.
yeah, and one of the things that I've noted is to present different options on street width.
Okay.
So we'd like to see different options on street width.
Earlier, rather than the-
and,
Which would not be more than
concept.
47 feet.
to not be more than 47. All right. Okay. Can we adjourn this meeting?
I'd
I
move
so
that we
move.
adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
You know, I'm on those gates. Blazing saddles.
In the middle of nowhere.
Gate because they don't have a damn dime.
Somebody's gonna have to go home.